One, two, three. Welcome back to the Black Brain Trust. This is Geopolitics, episode 115, and I am here by myself. My co-facilitators have not arrived yet, but I will get started anyways. If you want to follow along, the docket is in the description beneath the video. Let's get started. All right, so the first article is from Algeria.com. Your skin color was a crime. African migrants in Algeria. Sub-Saharan migrants tell stories of horror. Activists know that forced deportation from Algeria is an ongoing trend. So, for those who don't know, Algeria is in the northern part of the continent of Africa. And I'll read the first couple paragraphs. In 1991, Michael George Johnson was 11 years old when he left his country for the first time. Both his parents were killed months earlier in one of post-independence Africa's worst instances of bloodshed, the Liberian Civil War. Johnson spent the following 27 years searching for a safe place to settle and trying to leave the ghosts of the conflict behind. One day, at the beginning of October, he arrived in Niger, having survived a week-long forced trip through the Algerian desert. Quote, we have, we have, we've been gathered in buses, traveling from town to town without food, obliged to walk for 30 kilometers in the Sahara with a gun to our heads and packed like animals in a truck until we reach Ajez, he recalled. The convoy carried a total of 279 people, rounded up in police operations all over Algeria. There were Cameroonians, Ivorians, Ghanaians, Nigerians, women and children. We saw everything there, he had. Johnson forced trip was one of among dozens of mass expulsions of migrants organized by Algerian authorities in 2018, attracting international criticism over the country's treatment of sub-Saharan citizens, often abandoned in the desert hours away from closest border posts in Nigeria. In Niger, um, I don't want to go too much into this. It's a pretty long article. That's one of the buses, one of the trucks that they use to pack most of the people in. So you still have racism in Africa, even by leaders on the continent and the authorities, and they don't seem to be doing anything about it. So, um, just the word of advice when you travel. Let me see who's. Nobody's here in the chat yet. So, yeah, interesting article. If you want to follow along, it's in the docket in the description beneath the video. All right, next video is from presstv.com. Egyptian Interior Ministry, 14 militants killed in the Sinai. This is an interesting one because what they are battling with in the Sinai is a lot of blowback from what happened in 2013 when Mohamed Morsi, the president of Egypt at the time, was overthrown by Egyptian military, and they replaced him with Al Sisi, who is now the current president. And the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the party that ran, that was in power at the time, before Al-Sisi, under Morsi, was ousted. So basically, they locked up hundreds of people and put them in jail and basically gave them the death penalty. Um, Let me pause this real quick. I did send out the link, Lionel. If you check your email. Who just joined?
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Paul, what's going on, brother? How are you?
I'm good, sir. How was your holiday?
Good, and yours?
I don't actually celebrate, but to those who do, my best thoughts and wishes.
Sounds good. Let me finish this article real quick, and we'll jump into the analysis. Yeah, so Morsi Morsi was supported by the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood externally is supported by Turkey and Qatar. However, in the UAE as well, in some aspects. However, Saudi Arabia does not like that, and neither does and neither does the United States. They don't like the Muslim Brotherhood. So, the military overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood party and replaced it with El-Sisi. So now all these people who were supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood are in the streets, basically raging war over this, over the coup. Once the coup attempt happened, these people were left without any political representation. So now what you see is the Egyptian government basically bombing dissidents in the Sinai, because that's what those people were forced out to, because no one wants to be arrested and put in jail, because a lot of the people who were put in jail from the Brotherhood were actually sentenced gave them the death penalty. Hundreds of people. That would be unthinkable in the United States, to put hundreds of people in jail and just give them the death penalty. So here, um, people would rather fight back. However, some of that, some of the support that they've been getting, rumored from Tel Aviv. So you could have external parties interfering into the political process of Egypt. Paul, you have anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, I find it very interesting, first off, that the Mossad is rumored to be involved. I actually look through the article, and the gentleman claims that Israel has their hand in this, and that as someone who's been following this region for years, for a long time, this is par for the course for the Mossad. The Mossad runs nothing but false flag operations daily. So, I am not surprised. In fact, I would bet my season tickets that what he's saying as far as Israel's involvement through the Mossad running a false flag operation is 100% accurate. And as far as Egypt itself goes, it's very interesting because the government of Saudi Arabia is not well liked by a lot of Arabs in the region. So they tend to go to places where they feel are friendly to them, and they lash out, they strike out. So it's just more of the same in this region. Nothing really new, just really more of the same.
No, it's a good. That's actually a great point that you brought up about Saudi Arabia, because Egypt actually sold two islands a year or so ago to Saudi Arabia,
Hmm.
and the Egyptians were very angry on the ground about that, and they never really recovered about it, politically speaking. So that's been a thorn in their side for the last year and a half or so. So these two islands has been rumored that they could use them. They could transfer those islands to Israel, because Israel and Saudi Arabia is in bed together.
Right.
Um, so if those islands get transferred to Israel, you know, the blowback could be massive. You could see the African Union, call for a meeting. You could see potential strikes, from the Egyptian military. I think there's a disconnect between Egyptian intelligence, the political body, and then the military aspect. So somebody's making decisions without consulting the other.
which is interesting, based on the news that Israel has been pushing hard to join the African Union. Really puts a lot of things into a new potential perspective.
Hmm.
I just listen without going into the whole anti-Israeli Jewish rhetoric.
Hmm.
I am thoroughly aware of what Israel does to the Palestinians inside the country and outside. I study this 10 ways to Sunday, and
Hmm.
I absolutely, not to sound like Brother Nagone, but I absolutely do not trust anything Israel says or does. Everything they do has an ulterior motive, ultimately to the benefit of Israel and the detriment of every Arab speaking nation in that region.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that because Sinai is actually supposed to be a new manufacturing hub.
Mm.
So there's a lot of Chinese investment. I think there's about $1 billion in investment or $2 billion in investment inside the Sinai for manufacturing vehicles, manufacturing clothes, and a new port for dropping off goods from China. So China doesn't have to deliver, doesn't have to make that long trek from China, from Beijing, all the way up to the Red Sea. They can just manufacture goods there using African labor and then ship it into Europe.
Which is also interesting because that is a very sore spot because I don't recall offhand if it was the 67 war or the 73 war. Don't quote me, but one of those two wars were directly over that Sinai region, fought, I believe, between Egypt and Israel, or Egypt and a few other Arab countries and Israel. So, no one there. I think you make a very good point as to within Egypt, someone's making decisions and the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. But overall, no one has forgotten what took place in the 60s and 70s, much less what happened back in 47. But normally I would say, but I digress. But in this point, everything really goes back to 1947
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, a lot of the Camp David accords with Jimmy Carter
and
and
Wasadat.
Sadat. Yeah, and Sadat called for that Egypt can't put their military bases inside the Sinai in order for Israel to give up the Sinai because at one point they had did occupy, which is why Israel wanted to take. I mean, Egypt wanted to take it back from Israel.
Right,
That's what sparked the '73 war.
right,
So
right,
um, Egypt can't put a military there, and they can't control a lot of the domestic violence that's happening inside the that part of the region, inside that part of the country. So my geopolitical hat says you should actually put the African Union there, and that way you justify having a neutral security group inside the region. Um, Palestinians used to travel back and forth through that region until Egypt closed the border because Israel told them to. So again, it goes back to somebody's making decisions without consulting the other because uh, if Palestinians can't have freedom of travel between the Sinai and Gaza, then that means that Palestinians are starving. And then if you have all of these rogue elements from the Muslim Brotherhood, who you consider to be domestic terrorists, then it's a hotbed for violence, and you're gonna end up bombing this country, but bombing that part of the region, and it doesn't really serve you any justice. It's a lot of flat land, to be quite frank. It doesn't seem like it should be hard for the Egyptian military to actually control it. At least create a a special police force that just deals with the region itself rather than put a military there because of some of your agreements.
Well, you're right. And putting on my geopolitical hat, I also have to also look at history. The United States, since the war, and I mean World War II, has absolutely followed a policy. Really, you could say going back to the Monroe Doctrine and Manifest Destiny of destabilize, destabilize, destabilize. So even though you have the Muslim Brotherhood, which now claims are being made that they are financed or created in part or in whole by the Mossad, I also have to remind people, or at least instruct people, that ISIS ultimately came from the Mujahideen, which was created ultimately by the CIA. So anything that happens in this region, I take it with an absolute grain of salt. Now, one would say, well, what purpose would the U.S. have for doing that? Again, the United States feels the policy has been since the war. It's better to have a country destabilized and weakened and deal with them that way, because ultimately a weakened, destabilized country the U.S. can control. And for the people here who call those shots, that's their MO. So between that happening, between the Mossad may or may not, which I totally believe they're involved there. I see this as one giant clusterfuck, for lack of a better term.
Okay. Lionel Jenkins, you have anything you want to
No, sir. Nothing to add.
add? Okay. We'll move on to the next article. All right, this next article is from Reuters.com. Cuban lawmakers approve new constitution which heads to referendum. Havana. Cuban lawmakers on Saturday unanimously approved a revised draft of a new constitution that retains the island's one-party socialist system but reflects its social economic op- opening since the fall of the Soviet Union. Interesting. The new the draft new con- the draft new constitution. To me, it's just this written pretty poorly for the Reuters. The draft new constitution, which has 229 articles and will replace the Cold War era one, will maintain the Communist Party as the country's guiding force in the state's dominance of the economy. According to state-run media, a copy has not yet been distributed to the public. The document, however, also legitimizes private businesses that has blossomed over the last decade, acknowledges the importance of foreign investment, and opens the door to gay marriage, according to the state-run media. It imposes age and term limits on the presidency after late revolutionary leader Fidel Castro and his younger brother Raul Castro ruled the country for nearly 6 decades and introduces the role of a prime minister. The current draft incorporates into an original one published in July hundreds of mainly small changes proposed by citizens during a 3-month public consultation at community meetings nationwide. It will go it will go to a referendum next February 24th. This process is a genuine and exceptional demonstration of the practice of power by the people, and mark therefore of the markedly this is poorly written markedly participative democratic nature of our political system. President Miguel Diaz-Canel told the National Assembly in a speech closing its week-long, twice-yearly session. The 58-year-old took office from his mentor Raul Castro in April, although the latter remains head of the Communist Party until 2021. Critics say the fundamentals of Cuba's system were never up for discussion, and the government only included suggestions it wanted to. Some, including opposition groups that typically do not mobilize many people are already campaigning against the Constitution online using the hashtag Yo voto no, I vote no. Anyways, this is it's a pretty interesting article. What do you think about this? I know.
Uh, I I'll just listen to what you all have to say about it first.
Mm-hmm. Paul.
Yeah. First off, and for some reason, the first thing that caught my eye was the fact of their supposed stance on gay marriage and gays and transgenders and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why I mention that is that Fidel Castro was castigated in all corners of this country
Mm-hmm.
because when AIDS broke out in Cuba, Fidel said no, to hell with human rights. He rounded up every AIDS patient. He
Mm-hmm.
segregated them and says, "You will have zero contact with the main population of Cuba. We will not have an outbreak here." Now, say what you want, cruel, callous. It seemed to have worked. Now, that's as far as I'll go with that. I find it interesting that I believe you spoke on this about a week ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago, and we were speaking about the economic future of Cuba and how they basically have, not going to say run its course, but they've kind of been put into a box both by their policies and by the U.S. So
Mm-hmm.
they have to start doing things differently.
Mm-hmm.
It seems as if it seems to me on this article, from what I've read and researched,
Mm-hmm.
it seems to be more lip service than anything else. It's nothing substantive. So we'll see how things play out, but it's like they realize that they need to do things differently to reemerge on the global stage, but they don't want to give up their hardline communist system that they've had since 66, since 60, I believe.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I know.
My bad. Yeah, I have no comments on this one.
Okay. Um. So this is really a policy of the United States. Jamaica and many African countries have had um, subsidies and investment put on the back burner because they wouldn't accept same-sex marriage. So that's why when Obama went to Africa on his African trip, I think the first term, um, they basically kind of booed him and kind of like, what do who do you think you are coming here telling us, all of these things about African women are being oppressed and, same-sex marriage and you have to accept it. Because in order for the IMF to actually dole out funds to them, they said that you have to accept same-sex marriage, and they said, Jamaica was like one of the first countries to say, like, what are you talking about? Like, we don't do that here. Like, it's against the law. So, a lot of these countries have been economically deprived, have to turn to China, and that forced a lot of your African and melanated states to actually, turn to the east, turn to Southeast Asia to actually get some assistance. And Cuba being one of these countries, part of the reason why there's sanctions on them is because they wouldn't have democracy. Well, now they have a president in power. So now what's the problem? Okay, well it's because you don't have the lack of same-sex marriage is a human rights violation somehow, right? So this suddenly there's oppression on the island. And in reality, the only oppression that's happening on the island is in Gitmo, in Guantanamo Bay, where the United States military has a secret base holding Middle East, Muslims, in a detention center, torturing these people. But they don't talk about that. So, Cuba has to make some of these reforms. Part of it is part of it is the fault of the communist state. The other half is the meddling of Western powers. They could easily copy A lot of the economic forms, socioeconomic forms that Vietnam has, because Vietnam is still a communist state too, but they still seem to function very well.
Oh,
But we
really?
see, yeah, they seem to function very well. They've opened up their markets, so they're actually the hottest country right now in Asia to invest into outside of China.
I so I did not know that Vietnam. Honestly, I was unaware that they're still communist.
Yeah, they still have a communist government, so
Mm.
they opened up for reformations years ago, but they're the hottest as of December of 2018. They're the hottest country in Southeast Asia for investment,
Mm.
for businesses. So I have a well, I won't get into that right now, but this is part of the issue. Like Western nations are interfering into the internal affairs of many of these countries, including Jamaica. Jamaica had the same problem. That's why when Obama came to Jamaica, people were stunned at some of the stuff that he was saying, because it was inconsistent with the policies of the state itself. Like why would they have to accept this crazy stuff? Even Putin. I think a couple of years ago, basically said, gave a one-way ticket to a lot of these a lot of the what's considered to be homosexuals or gays in Russia, and said you can go to San Francisco and go live there.
I do recall that.
Yeah, yeah, we're not going to change our policies. So
Yeah. I'll say this about Putin. Say what say what you want about him. He's consistent. If nothing else, he is consistent.
mhm.
It's like, hey, my way or the highway. I've been speaking to some Russian contacts who are my age. Have been here in this country after the fall of the USSR, and they have some very interesting things to say about Putin. I won't necessarily bring them up now, maybe later in private, but communism, I don't know. I have to say, as a system of governance, I'm really starting to question how much shelf life communism really has. But now, with that in mind, we do see what North Korea and China are doing. So, who knows? Maybe I'm wrong.
North Korea and China is doing in terms of.
As terms of in terms of overall viability as a nation.
Mhm.
So again, that's why I could be totally off base about the shelf life of communism. Maybe it's not so much the system of governance itself, communism. It's the implementation of the system. How do you go about doing it? Because
Mhm.
again, China, we really don't need to even speak on that. China is what it is. Okay.
Mhm.
So we see what's happening in Cuba, but is that so much the system of governance, or you know meddling of other countries, the relatively small size of the nation, um, certain certain specific choices that Castro himself made that were more to thumb his nose at the U.S. more so than to benefit his country. So maybe it's not so much the system of governance itself. It comes down to the actual the implementation of it.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it would work just fine if it's not being interfered with.
Mm,
Because microeconomies tend to function very well, such as like farmers markets and things of that nature, right? So that form of capitalism, without interference, actually works. You see it in any country, in any state, that microeconomies work. But what happens when you have Western powers or outside interference, putting sanctions and blockades and things like that onto your country, then you can't get the necessary goods in, then you can't do business. So people just say, oh, well, this is a socialist country. Look at Venezuela. We don't want socialism. And it's like, you already have socialism in America. You have public libraries, you have public institutions. all paid for by the people. What are you talking about?
Exactly. But see, Americans have no idea what socialism really is,
Mm-hmm.
because communism is not socialism. It is a form of socialism that was created. It is different. It's not the same thing. But Cuba, at least for a few decades anyway, showed it is viable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Russia, the former Soviet state, China, North Korea, Vietnam, which I did not know was still communist. It is viable and it does work. I also have to say, socialism also, it's viable, it does work, but it's in the implementation. And
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, if you have foreign states that are directly or indirectly trying to undermine your state, you're going to have problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that many African countries still have communist leanings, um, which is why they seem to integrate so well within uh, Chinese frameworks for business,
Mm,
because it's almost parallel. I mean, I know a lot of people say that, oh, China's colonizing Africa, and with debts, debt bondage and things like that. But in reality, if you remove the uh, the idea of debt bondage and slavery and debt enslavement, a lot of their policies actually align one for one.
true, true. And I won't get, I won't go so much into certain philosophical debates on that, or even historical debates, but where the rubber meets the road, what you just said, I really can't agree more. And if you have to look at um, when it when sorry, when it comes to boots on the ground, China is absolutely building infrastructure. The thing is, there's a tremendous amount to be built, so it's slow going, and there isn't the necessary human capital needed. But they're definitely making inroads. So things are slowly changing. How they'll turn out, maybe now that's a different conversation to have. But
Mhm.
time will tell.
Yes, indeed. Let me get to the next article. We're kind of short on time. All right, this next article is from timeinc.net. USAF, U.S. Air Force's next budget request will include the new F-15X Advanced Eagle fighter jet. That's what the report says. I'll read this first paragraph. Last July, I broke a story about the existence of Boeing's F-15X Advanced Eagle concept, one that the plane maker had been in discussions with the United States Air Force about for many months. That aircraft would be procured to replace America's existing F-15 CD, Charlie David aircraft frame, the vast majority of which are operated by Air National Guard. Since my expose, the United States Air Force has officially remained somewhat flippant about the F-15X and its talks with Boeing, which isn't surprising, but according to the Bloomberg report, that is about to change dramatically very soon. The F-15X airframe would be single seat, but it would incorporate decades of innovation that are being applied currently in the latest F-15 Strike Eagle, derivatives being purchased by Saudi Arabia, F-15 SA, and Qatar, F-15 QA. With an airframe life of a whopping 20,000 hours in the latest sensors, flight control systems, and avionics, the F-15X would serve for many decades at an operating cost that Boeing claims will trounce that of the existing F-15CD fleet, the youngest of which is now 32 years old, basically paying for the airframes with savings within about a decade. Tehran of Bloomberg government writes that the United States Air Force will include $1.2 billion for 12 Boeing 15X fighter aircraft in its 2020 budget that requests 2020 budget request that is due to be published in February. The story also notes that pressure to buy the F-15X is coming from the powers that be inside the Pentagon that are external to the United States Air Force itself, which would explain the disconnect over potential and procurement program with the service's top leadership. So I think this is rather interesting because you just spent billions of dollars on the F-35 that doesn't really work, and now you want to buy some more aircraft that doesn't for about 12 aircraft. I think, what did they say, $1.2 billion?
Yeah.
That's absurd.
Well, you know what? I think that what we're seeing here is a disconnect between the military-industrial complex that wants the F-35 and some hardcore military who are saying that the F-35 doesn't work. It's beaten in every single war game trial to date by the Raptor, the F-18, and the F-15. The F-15 is old, but it's still beating the F-35.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're seeing a case of a kind of a backdoor. It's not a way out. We're stuck with it, and allies are stuck with it. But someone's saying, "Hey, listen, we need something that works, and we need it now."
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, and you're right. It's an absolute joke, because the Air Force didn't want it, the Navy didn't want it. It was rammed down their throats. But hey, we're stuck with it because Lockheed can't fail.
Now, there's another company called Textron that built a light attack aircraft, I think a couple of years ago, from New England. This is like a very entry-level fighter jet, basically. It's good for ground attacks on tanks, and has a long fuel capacity. I think it goes about maybe 500 to 600 miles an hour. Has fifth generation electronics in it, so it's up there with the F-18 and a couple of those other ones. And it's significantly cheaper, but no one seems to be in the Pentagon. No one seems to want to buy it. But when you have lobbyists, from Boeing and Lockheed, they decide that we're going to spend $1.2 billion on 12 airplanes.
Well,
right? You can buy, I think, 36 of those Textrons. Let me pull it up just for so people can know what I'm talking about. Yeah, Scorpion. That's what it is.
the Deputy Secretary of Defense, who is now the Acting Secretary of Defense,
Mm-hmm.
is not even military. He's a former executive at Boeing. Okay, there's your military-industrial complex. The funny thing is, see, Boeing does not need defense contracts to stay in business. Lockheed does. As I've said over and over to anyone who will listen, that's why we have the F-35.
Right.
It's all about keeping Lockheed in business, so the military-industrial complex can keep making money. It never had anything to do with national defense, because that piece of garbage does not work. It is an absolute joke.
They also built a littoral class warship that doesn't work either. I think they were involved in that project.
Yes, the Zumwalt, which
Yeah.
has been having all kinds of problems.
Mm-hmm. Right. It gets stuck in the middle of the ocean because the systems fail. But I think this is all a part of, we're going to build a crappy system, and then we're going to take off with the money, then cancel the project, transferring the wealth. But yeah, this Textron Scorpion light strike fighter jet can do everything that the F-15 and the F-16 can do at one quarter of the cost.
So why is this thing not being built?
Textron doesn't have any any lobbyists fighting for it.
So why doesn't Boeing step in? Why doesn't Lockheed step in? Since see again, Boeing does not need defense contracts to stay alive. They don't. They're still the largest commercial manufacturer in the world. And since Boeing bought McDonnell Douglas, they still have the F-18, which is not being made anymore, but they're still upkeep and maintenance. So Boeing is set. They don't need defense contracts to stay alive. But this would be an excellent way to get in. You know, Boeing's design, the Boeing's competing design for the F-22 Raptor was better than Lockheed's, but Lockheed needs defense contractors. Boeing's design against the F-35 was a superior concept. But again, Lockheed needs defense contracts to stay alive. So here we have a homegrown fighter that fits the bill that this article speaks to. Everything that you just said. I've never even heard of this company. But if it's better and it's one-fifth the price, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I want to say they're out of Rhode Island. I
Okay.
could be wrong on that. I think they're in the outside of Providence area. But yeah, I've been following this for a few years. I used to work in Providence when I used to do security work down there. But
Gotcha.
it, I just find it interesting that you're going to spend 1.2 billion dollars on 12 aircraft, and you can buy 36 of these for the same price.
Well, what I was going to say. Besides that, the only part of that absurdity that makes sense to me is that someone's trying to hide the black budget. Okay,
Hmm.
because the $800 hammers and the $2,000 toilet seats from the 1980s, they never cost that much. That was trying to hide the black budget because Ronald Reagan exponentially increased the black budget. So unless you're telling me that once again you're about to ramp up the black budget again, so you're trying to hide it with with this absurd procurement of 12 aircrafts. I mean, that's unheard of. Even the even the SR-71 Blackbird, they made 32 of those.
Hmm.
1.2 billion for 12 aircraft. That's absurd.
I just want to answer Charlie Ross in the chat. He asked the question, "How do we know it can do everything cheaper?" They tested it a couple of years ago. This Textron fighter jet, light attack fighter jet, was actually tested a few years ago against a F-15 or something like that, and it was pretty much keeping up with it at a fraction of the cost. But then again, um, India had a MiG-21 fighter jet with upgraded electronics from Israel. Israel has a company that builds fourth and fifth generation electronic suites for make fighter jets, basically
Really?
to keep them up. Yes, and they put those fourth and fifth generation electronics inside that MiG 21, which is the Bison, and that thing kept up with a F-16 like it was nothing.
Now, my question is why would Israel, a supposed ally of the US, build hardware to support the mainline fighter of Russia or the former Soviet Union?
It
That
was well they're in the hardware business, so it doesn't they have no political allegiance to
okay.
anything. They have no
Got,
political allegiance to anything. But the fact that they can swap out the electronics and they can keep up, And I looked at some auctions, I think like maybe earlier this year or maybe a year or so ago. This was a while back. You can get a MiG 21 fighter jet on the auction block without any of the armaments for $500,000 or
really?
three about $700,000 for an airframe.
Wow.
And there's people that actually buy them. There's
Wow.
guys who got deep pockets, they buy those things and they hold on to them, they fly them. They just don't have the fire controls to them. And I find that to be very interesting because you can actually stick those fourth and fifth generation electronics inside them. I think the cost to upgrade a MiG 21 is $1.2 million dollars with all the electronics and the new fire control systems. So you get a MiG 21 airframe for about $500,000, and then you put in an 1.2 into it, and now you got a full fighter jet.
That's a game changer.
It is. It is. And China and Russia did not demolish any of their old MiG fighter jets from the Cold War. They actually repurposed them. They turned them into drones.
Really?
Yeah. So they have probably about 100 and something of these MiG fighter jets sitting inside storage facilities that have fifth generation electronics inside them as and use them as drones.
You know what? I have a lot to say, but there's another article that you're about to get to. I'll wait. I'll wait until then.
All right, let's get straight to it then. All right, this next article is from the Times of India. Chandbahar Port, India, Afghanistan, Iran agree on routes for trade and transit corridors. New Delhi, a crucial trilateral meeting of the officials from India, Afghanistan, and Iran on the strategically important Chabahar port was held on Monday, during which they agreed on routes for trade and transit corridors between the three countries. The first meeting of the follow-up committee for implementation of the trilateral Chabahar agreement between India, Afghanistan, and Iran at the level of Joint Secretary or Director General was held in the Iranian port city of Chabahar. The Ministry of External Affairs said. On the occasion, India Ports Global Limited Company opened its office and took over operations at the Shahid Beheshti port of Chabahar. Quote, positive and constructive discussions were held between the three sides on full operationalization of the trilateral transit agreement for international transit and transport through Chabahar port. They agreed on the routes for the trade and transit corridors between the three countries. It was agreed to finalize at the earliest with the protocol to harmonize transit, roads, customs, and consular matters. Basically, what's happening here is that you have two titans, which is India and Iran, and one child state, which is Afghanistan. Basically forming their own sort of pact for shipping routes and goods. What's your take on this, Mr. Paul?
I really don't have much to add. I mean, you've covered it. It's pretty self-explanatory, and for myself, I think that it's countries countries taking their self-determination into their own hands, because the United States economically decimated India uh, back in the early '90s and early 2000s. So I see this as, in one way, a way to push back, and good for them. And I
Mm-hmm.
really don't have much more to add.
All right, we'll move on to the next article. I guess I'll say my two pieces to this. India is a superpower as well as Iran. Both of these countries hold nuclear weapons and have a vastly highly educated class of people. India is an IT superpower, and Iran is a oil bearing superpower. So they're going to try to stabilize Afghanistan to their advantage, because it's in their best interest, because Afghanistan holds a lot of lithium and some poppy seeds as well, but lithium is more important. And there's also undiscovered amounts of gas sitting inside Afghanistan that the Americans want, and they can't get, because they can't stabilize the country, because 50% of the country is being supported by the Taliban. So um, this is it's not so much of a game changer, but it is a wake up call to Western powers that there is stability coming outside of London, Brussels, and Washington D.C.
I see. I Mm. Interesting.
Mhm. All right, this next one is from Reuters.com. Iran says ready to respond, but U.S. aircraft carriers no threat. They can sink it. Iran is ready to respond to any hostile action, but it does not consider the arrival of a U.S. aircraft carrier in the Gulf last week with a significant threat, an Iranian Navy commander said on Monday. The USS John C. Stennis entered the Gulf on Friday, ending a long absence of U.S. aircraft carriers in the region as tensions rise between Tehran and Washington. Quote, the presence of this warship is significant to us. Rear Admiral Habibullah Sariri was quoted as saying by the semi-official ISNA news agency. We will not allow warships to come near our territory waters in the Persian Gulf, said Sariri. Sariri said the U.S. Navy was allowed to sail international waters near Iran, just as the Iranian Navy could sail in the Atlantic Ocean near U.S. waters. He said, however, that Iran was on alert for possible threats. They do not have the courage or the ability to take any measures against us. We have enough capabilities to stand against their actions, and we have fully rehearsed for that. Iran's, Iran's elite Revolutionary Guard launched war games in the Gulf on Saturday, which Navy vessels, helicopters, drones, rocket launchers, and commando units took part. Praising the success of the war games, Guard spokesman Brigadier General Ramazan Sharif said on Monday, the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman has had more safety and security in the last 10 months in the absence of a U.S. aircraft carrier. So Iran's ready for a fight. It's the best that you can, best that I can sum it up to. What's your take on this, Paul?
Well, I am not a sorry, I am not a military hawk by any means. However, I do subscribe to the school of attack the enemy with overwhelming force and completely eliminate his ability to wage war. So I say, you know what? If you want to talk tough, bring it on. Because at the end of the day, um, we already know no country's navy, including this country's, is really battle tested. Uh,
Mhm.
the fighter pilots are, yes, but the United States does not have the only battle tested fighter pilots in the world. So Iran can talk tough, even the U.S. can talk tough, but at the end of the day, we really don't know because no Navy is actually battle tested. So if they are ready and if they really want conflict, then you know what? Bring it on because maybe the U.S. military needs a good punch in the nose, or Iran will get punched in the nose. And you know what? Maybe they'll bloody each other up. But I think either way, you know what? Bring it on. Because I really don't know that anyone can say with any factual confidence that they really know which side will actually be a victor in case of a military conflict.
Yeah, the U.S. Navy has been demining the Persian Gulf for quite some time because there's a lot of sea mines sitting inside that whole entire vein, um, that whole artery, I should say. So if there was going to be a conflict, they would lose that warship or a couple of their warships going in. That would be a fact going in.
Right.
Uh, Iran would probably get decimated at their western point, at the shoreline, but they're pretty dug into those mountains, so you would have a hard time. If the U.S. would have a hard time getting in there to penetrate. Their tanks don't really roll really well into those goat paths, so it would be a suicide mission. The last time anybody tried to conquer Iran, got dismantled really quickly. I think that was Saddam. Saddam had a hard time getting inside Iran, so he used chemical weapons against them. So,
Yes, he did, which were very effective. But that's another conversation for another day. And short of shore bombardment, which the U.S. which the U.S. Navy really no longer has since we don't have battleships anymore. That leaves aerial bombing, and that takes a lot. So yeah, it's who knows? Bring it on, bring it on. I'm just curious to see a fight, honestly, because I can't say which side is really going to win.
All right, next article is from NewYorkTimes.com. China's Belt and Road plan in Pakistan takes a military turn. Islamabad, Pakistan. When President Trump started the new year by suspending billions of dollars of security aid to Pakistan, one theory was that it would scare the Pakistani military into cooperating better with its American allies. The reality was that Pakistan already had a replacement sponsor lined up. Just 2 weeks later, the Pakistani Air Force and Chinese officials were putting the final touches on a secret proposal to expand Pakistan's building of Chinese military jets, weaponry, and other hardware. The confidential plan, reviewed by the New York Times, would also deepen the cooperation between China and Pakistan in space, a frontier the Pentagon recently said Beijing was trying to militarize after decades of playing catch up. All the military projects were designated as part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, a $1 trillion chain of infrastructure development programs stretching across some 70 countries, built and financed by Beijing. Chinese officials have reportedly said the Belt and Road is purely an economic project with peaceful intent. But with its plan for Pakistan, China is for the first time explicitly trying a Belt and Road proposal to its military ambitions, and confirming the concerns of a host of nations who suspected the infrastructure initially is really about helping China project armed might. As China's strategically located and nuclear armed neighbor, Pakistan has been the leading example of how Chinese projects are being used to give Beijing both favor and leverage among its clients. Since the beginning of the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013, Pakistan has been the program's flagship site, with some $62 billion in projects planned in the so-called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor (CPEC). In the process, China has lent more and more money to Pakistan at a time of economic desperation there, binding the two countries even closer. For the most part, Pakistan has eagerly turned more towards China as the chill with the United States has deepened. Some Pakistan officials are growing concerned about losing sovereignty to their deep-pocketed Asian ally, but the host of ways the two countries are now bond together may leave Pakistan with little choice but to go along. Even before the revelation of the new Chinese-Pakistani military cooperation, some some of China's biggest projects in Pakistan had clear strategic implications. This is just a map of the CPEC corridor and the BRI. Paul Bryant, what's your take on this?
Um, honestly, to me, it's public consumption. China is the new global boogeyman because at the end of the day, China and the U.S. are economically linked at the hip. So China has China has replaced Russia, specifically the USSR as the global boogeyman, who in turn replaced Nazi Germany, who in turn replaced Imperial Germany. So you know we've seen this TV show play out before.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not overly concerned because we've seen this before. The only thing that's changed are the characters. Same bat time, same bat channel. It's the
Mm-hmm.
same old story, just new characters. And instead of the U.S. and the Soviet Union waging a cold war through proxy agents, it's the U.S. and China waging a cold war again through proxy agents.
Mm-hmm.
So the ramifications for the countries involved, you know, they're fairly obvious as far as the economic and political and social development and infrastructure and so on and so forth. But that's pretty much my take on it.
this is Pakistan's fault, in terms of losing their own sovereignty. They spent a lot of money, building nuclear weapons, and they left, they sacrificed all of their, the rest of their chips. They put all their chips in one basket, basically, and they couldn't afford to feed their people. And then you have incoming egress and egress of terrorists on your border between Afghanistan and India. So this is really Pakistan's fault for spending all their chips. And the other the other portion of the issue is that India was able to recover, from the 90s, becoming a IT global power right now, and Pakistan hasn't done anything remotely close to this outside of building nuclear weapons and terrorizing people and hiding Bin Laden. So I just find that to be I don't feel sorry for Pakistan, although I don't wish any ill will towards them. But you kind of shot yourself in the foot trying to keep pace with India. India was able to develop nuclear weapons, have a very strong military, and have a highly educated, growing class of people that can actually bring money back to their subcontinent. So
Well, it's funny because at the end of the day, India and Pakistan, um, it's a sibling rivalry. Before 1947, Pakistan did not exist. After the war, Britain could not maintain its crown jewel colony, that being India. They pulled out. The Hindus and the Muslims fought. The new land of Pakistan was created, and so that infighting and division has been ever since. So Pakistan, everything Pakistan does is basically based is centered around trying to thumb their nose at and jab India. And you're right; they absolutely have not kept pace. And they're still behind the gun, and it's their fault. Every move that they make, instead of centered around building the country, it's about trying to fight India, and they've been fighting a losing battle. So it's their fault.
well, the other area of failure for them is that if you look to the west of Pakistan, um, they the Iranians have been able to develop nuclear technology as well as hold on one second. Yeah, sorry, pardon for that. Iran has been able to develop nuclear technology as well as have a highly educated base of people despite the sanctions put on them. Why hasn't Pakistan done the same thing, right? So there's a whole lot of development issues that Pakistan has to figure out socially and actually politically speaking as well. But um, one point I just wanted to also bring up, on the map, you see that Afghanistan is sandwiched in between Pakistan and Iran and Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan and Tajikistan.
Right.
The United States military doesn't have a clean route to get out.
Good point.
They can't get out. So the Russians had gave them initially in 2001. Putin had gave them freedom of navigation to get inside Afghanistan, and they also had a strong relationship with Pakistan. But then that relationship soured. They screwed the Russians over a couple of times, so they stopped that. So now, no, now the Americans is basically stuck in Afghanistan and can't and sandwiched in between three empires that they can't get away from.
Yeah, it's absurd. It really is. It's you know what it's too many moving parts to really make a to really make an intelligent call as to what's really, sorry, to make an informed call as to what's really going on here. Because I look at this, and maybe I'm just jaded, but I see so many ulterior motives going on here, and I ask myself, who's really benefiting?
Hmm. I forget how much money they spent in San- um it's quite a bit. So
Hmm.
uh, shoot. All right, we'll move on to the next article. All right, this one is from Newsweek.com. Russia-Ukraine war. Moscow could launch armed attack over Christmas while the world is distracted by experts. Distracted, experts warn. Um, this is interesting. Uh, we're past Christmas now, so as people in Western Europe and the United States get comfortable for the holidays, the chances increase that Russia will take advantage of the distraction to launch attacks against its neighbor, Ukraine, experts said. On Monday, when millions of Christians who follow the Georgian calendar celebrate Christmas Eve, the Russian Foreign Ministry, Paul, I'm going to have to mute you real quick. The Russian Foreign Ministry warned it's quite possible the Ukraine will launch military action against Russia in the next few days. Kremlin spokeswoman Maria Zakharova even suggested that Kyiv was planning to stage chemical weapon attacks in eastern Ukraine as a pretext for launching an attack. But but experts and Western military analysts said it was Russia that was likely to launch an attack on Ukraine. Moscow likes to quote, Moscow likes to commit aggression when the world is not paying attention. It invaded Afghanistan during the Christmas season in 1979 and attacked Georgia during August vacation season. Ambassador John Herbst, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine 2003 to 2006, told Newsweek. The conflict between the two neighbors has been simmering for exactly 5 years, but the past month has been especially tense after Russia seized 3 Ukraine naval ships and detained 24 sailors on November 25th. The Ukrainian detainees still have not been released. Ukraine has since instated martial law in parts of the country believed to be vulnerable to Russia and warned of an imminent ground invasion by Moscow. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko warned in early December that Russia had around 80,000 troops stationed in parts of occupied Ukraine. The international community, meanwhile, accused Russia of aggression and called on Moscow to obey international law. But experts said that the holidays, combined with the recent resignation of Secretary of Defense James Mattis in Washington, could create the perfect scenario for a Russian offensive. The weak Western reaction to Moscow's escalation of its war against Ukraine by seizing its ships also raises the odds of a further Kremlin strike, said Hearst. So does the disarray in Washington, with Mattis' resignation and early departure. So, yeah, this is I find it interesting that the United States always seems to be concerned about some other country, but doesn't seem to care about the terrorists in its own country, right? It always seems to be concerned about what's happening in Ukraine and Georgia and Syria and Afghanistan, but then they're not too concerned about their own country though. What's your take on this, Paul?
I'm not familiar enough with the situation in general, so I will defer. But yeah, you're right. America always wants to butt its nose in, but never takes care of its own house.
Mm-hmm. Right. So basically, what's happening in Ukraine is that they've instated this martial law, and what they can do with martial law is they can round up anybody they want and have a unlimited curfew for the next 90 days. This gives perfect time for your military to build up an offensive to go into certain parts of a country that they deem unstable, um, and they can use justified force because legally it's martial law, so they can determine that there's bad actors that they have to take down, and the state is under the state is under martial law, so therefore there's no elections, there's no political gatherings or anything like that. It's just a blackout, media blackout basically. And if you if you're Ukraine, if you're the president of Ukraine, and you decide to go in there, uh, you're taking a big risk because what happened in 2008 with Georgia, Russia Russia was very patient, and once they started killing Russian peacekeepers, that was it. Dmitry Medvedev took the gloves off and said, "We're going to go in," because Putin was not in power at that time. He was actually the prime minister, and Medvedev was the president of Russia. They changed places after that. They decided to go into Georgia and cause a cyber warfare campaign, or waged a cyber warfare campaign, and basically made a complete blackout on Georgia. And the Georgian president, Saakashvili, tried to call the United States for help, and no doubt tone can't get any help. And the Russian tanks were already about a few miles away from their capital, coming in. So it was too late, anyways.
Was that
I,
the was that the same time that there was a movie theater or a some kind of a meeting hall and um the Russian military went in and they just killed every kidnapper in sight, like 100 people died or something like that.
yes,
Okay.
yes. So it was up to you because in order for Georgia to join NATO, for any state to join NATO, they have to have defined borders. And the problem is that there's an autonomous region in between Russia and Georgia that has no defined borders. So it's you have Russian peacekeepers down there to make sure that nothing happens. And what they tried to do was take the Georgian state tried to take that autonomous region and claim it for themselves. And the United States and Google was actually going to back them on this, by claiming it on the map that, oh, this is Georgian territory, so now you can join NATO. And Russia was going to go for that. Um, and interesting about that war was that they found a lot of African American men laying dead on the battlefield. The Russians had found them out there, um, without their insignias on their uniforms. They were actually NATO operatives. And what what I don't think the United States actually anticipated Russia's response. So if they didn't anticipate Russia's response there, they're definitely not going to be able to anticipate Russia's response in eastern Ukraine. Because if they wanted to take Ukraine, they can easily do it. They took Georgia in less than 7 days, the whole entire
W-
country.
wouldn't African American men or black men who claim that, I don't know, there's something to me that doesn't sound right about that story, that they were working for NATO. It sounds to me like that was maybe Marine Force Recon or CIA Black Ops.
That's the story on the ground. The pictures I saw were definitely black men. Those are definitely black men, African
Okay.
American men. On top of that, so it sounds to me like these guys were there to back up the Georgian forces. And what happened was these guys, the Georgian forces, actually took off their uniforms and basically bailed out and left those black men standing there. Who gave the order for that? I have no idea, but they didn't have enough artillery because Russia launched uh, guided missiles into those areas and basically pounded the area while those guys were trapped in there. So
Well, well, again, because the reason why I say that is I know that Um, the Green Berets.
Mhm.
Their primary role is to train insurgents on the ground. It just seems more likely to me that if those are American black men, that they're military. They're not NATO. But maybe I'm wrong. You know.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely definitely U.S. They were definitely U.S. But it, you had NATO officers inside Georgia a week before that. NATO was actually training Georgian troops 6 months prior to that. So this was in August that the attack happened. So back in February and March, they were actually training.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm. All right, move on to the next article. It's the day after Christmas, and we still have not seen a attack happen. So, all right, this one is from CNBC.com. Russia again successfully tests ship-based hypersonic missile, which will likely be ready for combat by 2022. Washington. Russia has conducted another successful test of its ship-based hypersonic missile, a weapon the United States is currently unable to defend against, according to two people with direct knowledge of U.S. intelligence report. The people who spoke to CNBC on condition of anonymity said Russia had carried out 5 total tests of its ship-based hypersonic missiles since 2013. The the last known test of the device dubbed Tiscaron, uh, Tisarcon, was successfully conducted December 10th and reached a top speed of Mach 8, approximately 8 times the speed of sound, or about 2 miles per second. What we what we are seeing with this particular weapon is that the Russian designed it to have dual purpose capability, meaning it can be used against a target on land as well as a vessel at sea. One source said last week's last week's successful test showed that the Russians were able to achieve sustained flight, a feat that is crucial in the development of hypersonic weapons. So Russia basically has a meteor that can take out just about any and everything that the United States has on the sea and on the ground. There's nothing you can do to stop a Mach 8 weapon coming at you. At least not at the moment. They probably won't have it for another 10 to 15 years either. It's not possible to stop something at two that moves at Mach 8 speed that can avoid um your traditional supersonic air defense systems or anti-ballistic missile systems.
Uh, yeah. If we're talking hypersonic offensive weapons, I can only think of another hypersonic defensive weapon, or I'm sorry, offensive weapon, basically a hypersonic Patriot missile, or directed energy weapons, which are real. The military is testing it on that fancy new aircraft carrier that they just built.
Mhm.
Which doesn't work, by the way, and also on their latest destroyers and cruisers. They're testing that for viability. I can't think of any other two ways besides that to stop a hypersonic weapon. So I will say this: it seems to me this brings me back to my childhood of the early '80s with the U.S. and the Soviets, with the Cold War and the military buildup. How this plays out, we'll see. But based on that, I'll say it's again public consumption, global boogeyman. But The threat is real. If nothing else, the threat is real.
And that brings us, to this point about aircraft carriers. If you have an aircraft carrier, um, and a hypersonic missile is launched, you probably don't have enough time to react. Your radar systems aren't going to be able to pick it up.
Absolutely not. If you're in, okay, if you're the John C. Stennis and you're in the Gulf, you're in the Arab region, they launch a hypersonic missile. By the time you see it on, by the time that the ship sees it on the radar screens, they're going to have 2 minutes to impact. 2 minutes. Even if you have planes in the sky, which a carrier in a combat area always has at least 2 or 3 squadrons in the air at all times,
Mm-hmm.
they can't react. The only thing that can stop a hypersonic weapon is something else that's hypersonic or directed energy weapons. So unless the military is lying to us and they already excuse me, and they already have viable working directed energy weapons, that carrier is done. It's a hidden target.
And the rest of the ships around it will be targeted too.
Yeah, the only safe ships are going to be the subs.
Mm-hmm.
That's it, because every carrier, no carrier goes out alone. A carrier goes out with a minimum of, I believe, 4 to 6 destroyers, 4 to 6 carriers, 2 support ships, and at least 1 submarine. So that entire fleet's done.
Yeah, Lionel has actually been on a carrier himself, so he could probably speak more to it. But you got 2,000, 3,000 people on the carrier. Where are those people going to go?
Nowhere. Not in 2 minutes. Not in 3 minutes.
And this
It's
is
just
and this missile, this hypersonic missile, is ship based. So
mm,
they're not launching it from Russia. They're launching it right off of a ship. Now
yeah.
we covered an article a couple of weeks ago where the Chinese actually were very close to ramming a U.S. warship. You get within 45 yards of a U.S. warship, that tells me that you guys are not ready for a full on a blue water fight. You're not ready for a blue water fight, because if I can get that close to you, I can shut down your radar systems and scramble your electronics or your cyber warfare capabilities. You're screwed.
Yeah, I still question that because the lookouts can see a lot farther than 45 yards. But even if we're talking about beyond the horizon,
Mhm.
which is I don't know, I'm gonna guess and say 10 miles. Because I know World War II battleships, um, they could see about 10 miles. The rangefinders could see about 20. Even still, at that range, a hypersonic weapon, you we're talking, Mike, 30 seconds,
Mhm.
and your carrier's done. So, again, unless these directed energy weapons, which the Navy says they have, they're testing them. They're putting on ships now to test them. Unless they're viable, these ships have zero defense against these hypersonic weapons.
Mhm. As long as they don't put it on the Zimmerwald. Well, that thing is a dead duck in the water. But yeah, I mean, 30 seconds. You're saying 30 seconds. I mean, say 30 seconds to put your pants on, one leg at a time.
Dude, you're done. So
Yeah.
like you said, a carrier holds about 4 to 5 thousand people.
Mhm.
30 seconds. No one's getting off that ship.
No, you don't even have enough time to put on a life jacket.
Yeah, you're done. You're done. So you know, we'll see. We'll see. They're saying that they won't be viable. They won't be ready for combat status for another 3 years. They're saying what 2022. I believe.
No, the first one goes in January 31st.
Oh, really?
Hmm.
That's a game changer.
So this was the final preliminary testing, but for full fleet. The full fleet won't be ready till 2022, but the first one goes in January 31st of 2019.
Well, I go back to what I said. Excuse me. U.S. Navy says they're testing directed energy weapons. Okay, that's real life phasers, not sci-fi. Real life phasers, directed energy weapons. So unless the military is lying to us and they're already viable, but they're just rolling them out, they have no defense. So
Yeah.
one can hope that they're lying and they're actually rolling out a viable weapon, because we know every military tech is 15 to 20 years ahead of what we see and what we get. But again, unless those directed energy weapons are viable and operational, there's zero defense. And all 11 carriers, including that one that doesn't work yet, the brand new shiny one, they have zero defense.
And this would have this wouldn't have come to this if they had let Russia into NATO. Putin asked, how come we can't join NATO? I think he asked this in 2001 or something like that. Let's let Russia join NATO. They said no.
But but isn't Russia part of the? No, no, I'm sorry. That's the UN Security Council. Right, right,
Yeah. Well, yeah, they're part of the UNSC, but then they wanted to join the European Union, but they see that's a disaster. They asked, can they join NATO? This was Putin, and he said, NATO said no. So now you have to deal with hypersonic missiles, coming down your backside, and you have no idea. You guys are out there playing ping pong in your upper deck, you know, and you have no idea that there's this spaceship that's flying at high velocity coming at you, and you can't do shit about it. Your M4 rifles are useless. Your your
right.
Patriot missile battery is useless.
Which reminds me, because I read the entire article. The Pakistan, India, or I don't know if it's in that article, or maybe you haven't gotten to it yet, about China putting missiles in one of these countries and launching satellites in space. So it was Iran or Afghanistan. So if China is launching rockets from these countries and they're putting military hardware in space, that goes back to what Reagan was talking about in 1980. One space based satellite in geosynchronous orbit can hit the entire United States of America with conventional weapons or a directed energy weapon, which can hit the entire hemisphere. So that's a huge deal, which comes back to these hypersonic weapons. So you had China launching hardware in space. You have Russia testing the viability, which they're claiming that they already have viable hypersonic weapons. This this changes the entire global landscape in terms of military power. And again, we're talking real things here. This isn't sci-fi anymore. This is all viable tech.
Yeah, this is not the Avengers. It's not. It's not Marvel.
Right.
Despite the fact I know some YouTubers like to put gloves on their hands and and call themselves mighty. Let's move on to the next article. Nutsacks for chins. WallStreetJournal.com. In shift, Trump orders U.S. troops out of Syria. Move throws campaign against Islamic State into question. Pullout sparks concerns from the White House, the State Department, to the Pentagon. Washington. President Trump ordered a rapid withdrawal of all U.S. military forces from Syria. Officials said Wednesday, making an abrupt shift of the U.S. posture in the Middle East. The U.S. immediately began moving a handful of personnel from Syria and will quickly extract about 2,000 forces over the next few weeks, officials said, ending a 4-year military campaign against Islamic State on the brink of its defeat. So Trump is weighing out. Trump is not as foolish as most people like to think he is. These these people that he has around him, who he outsourced his foreign policy to, are basically tried to screw him over by having the U.S. stand with the Kurds inside of Syria, a country that they're illegally occupying, and that the Damascus government has been asking them to leave, to go to war with Turkey. Turkey had sent out several requests telling the United States, that they are coming in, and it doesn't matter if you're there with the Kurds or not. We're going to bomb the Kurds. There has been cases in the last few months of U.S. military being injured or killed in Syria, stepping on IEDs, getting hit with random suppressing fire from the Turks and Turkish-backed soldiers, security contractors, and Trump is probably looking at this and saying, this doesn't make any sense. What are we gaining from this? What they were gaining from this was denying Bashar al-Assad his oil, because all the oil is in the east. It's not in the west of Syria. So the United States is basically sitting on top of his oil refineries in the east, and they can't, Assad needs oil. So what happened was, a few weeks ago, Iran has been trying to deliver oil to Syria, and that pissed off the Israelis, and that makes them want to go in there and take out Iran. So if you want to get Iran out of Syria, then you basically, you should leave Syria too if you're the United States, and but you leave the Kurds behind. And what that does with Turkey is that it allows Turkey to go in there and slaughter the Kurds, which should be considered a human rights violation. You're ethnically cleansing a bunch of people based on an assumption that they are terrorists. And realistically speaking, they are citizens of Syria, so they belong to the state, to the country, to the nation state of Syria. Assad has every right to go in there and protect his citizens, whether they're Kurds or they're Arabs. Now, the United States isn't looking into this as a possible legal issue, because they're using the Kurds as leverage. But at the same time, if you're talking about a military operation that is geared towards burying a bunch of Kurdish fighters inside Syria by the Turkish government, I would think that has to be some kind of legal ramifications for that. What do you think about this, Paul?
Yeah, it's it goes back to what I said earlier. It's the U.S. MO. If a country cannot be an outright ally, better to destabilize it than deal with it on any kind of an equal footing. Regardless of the chaos or anything that ensues or civil rights violations, better to have it destabilized than deal with it on an equal footing, which clearly is what the U.S. does in every Arab nation and on the continent of Africa and in the Spanish-speaking countries here. And the products for the new American century, the way forward, laid out this plan. And if you ever read it or ever get a chance to read it, step by step by step, the U.S. has done everything laid out in that paper, everything. So, as screwed up and as messed up as things are, it is what it is. And I don't mean to sound callous. It's just that I really don't see the situation improving anytime soon.
Well, you could see I have seen videos of Iraqis and Iranians and Afghanis basically taking off their uniforms and deciding that they're going to go into Syria to protect the Kurds from the Turks. So we'll see what happens in the next few days or the next few weeks. But you can see a nasty battle go out between Turkey and some of these non-conscript fighters. The Kurds are pretty much well dug inside Syria, so they have they are well shielded from some of the land warfare capabilities that Turkey has, but some of their air capabilities are obviously going to be much more superior to that of the Kurds, because the Kurds don't have an air force. They do have drones, but those drones are like same thing you can order from ToysRUs.com or Amazon. So
Yeah, it's interesting. Unfortunately, I'm a little embarrassed to admit I haven't been following as closely as I once was, so I really can't add much. But other than to say that we will be curious to see how things play out.
Yo.
Now, what's interesting about this is that Israel this week has announced support for the Kurds, that they will be supporting the Kurds in Syria.
They should.
Israel is supporting Arab-speaking peoples?
Well, Kurds is not really Arabs technically. They're not ethnically Arab. They are, in fact, they are Shiites. Kurds are, religiously speaking, they are Shiites. They are like those. You know what it reminds me of? They are the those Christian group, those Christian group, and that were facing extinction at the
Armenians.
No, not Armenian. Well, it is Armenian too, but the Christian group that was facing slaughter under Obama administration. That's why he was facing a lot of criticism. Remember that Christian group that was under when ISIS was right at the
the Yazidis.
Yes. So the Kurds, like Yazidi, they are the ethnic minorities within those Sunni majority.
Okay.
So yeah, Kurds, they're not really Arab. So I'm not surprised that Israel was supporting Kurds, because think about this: majority of Israel's enemies are Sunni Muslim. In fact, the one that argue for the extinction of the eradication of Israel were mainly Sunni Muslims. But what I don't understand was that all this time, Israel has been popping up with, popping up the Turks, as well as not Turks. I mean, Turkey, as well as Saudi Arabia, in their war against Shiites, Muslim minorities. So really, sometimes I never understand Israel's strategy. I think they trying to do this power play right now. They're trying to see if, which group were they, the Sunni versus the Shia. Because right now, really, the Muslim world are dividing into two camps right now. The Iran-led, or you can argue Syria. If Assad, you can include Assad, the Iran and Assad-led Shiite Muslim versus the Saudi Arabia, all those other Gulf states, Wahhabi Sunni Muslim. So really, that's what the power play dynamics right now in the Middle East. But what concerned the most is the fact that America or Israel, those non-Muslim, when they play all these power plays, sometimes they stab the enemy, stab the friends in the back. That's what I'm saying. When I read the article, I completely sympathize with how the Kurds feel. Sometimes America stab repeatedly in the back of the enemy, the friends, but repeatedly support the enemies. Just like when America support, selling all these war drones in the air, in his warplanes to Saudi Arabia bombing Yemen. It's like to be honest with you, if I had to choose between Shia Muslims, they would always been peaceful. They have never been the expansionary ones. If you look at historically, Shia Muslim is always the tolerant one, as well as the peaceful one. Sunni Muslim, which is the majority of the Muslim in the Middle East, they were the expansionary one. Like, for example, Ottoman Empire that comes to mind. Speaking of Turkey, Ottoman Empire. What Turkey right now, they're trying to do, they're trying to revive the Ottoman dream right now. That's why they overthrew the democratic government before this. Goodell's trying to usher in, the second Ottoman Empire fantasy. That's what he's trying to do right now. That's why he had the audacity right now to challenge America. Again, look at how America treat them. Continue billion dollars of foreign aid, in the military aid. All for what? All because they trying to pacify so-called quote-unquote ISIS in the Middle East? Bullshit. If anything, Turkey was actively encouraging the growth of those radical Islamic fundamentalists in the Middle East. But again, like I said, just like that's what I'm saying. Just like Ron Paul said, remember Ron Paul once said the blowback effects, right? America just gonna continue to make the wrong enemy over and over again, and then stab the wrong friends, good the friends, and over again.
You know, you are so right, because the Ahmadinejad, he was Shiite, and he he differed obviously differently from the Sunnis, because those guys basically are religious hardline fanatics, and that's one of the reasons that the U.S. was so keen to destabilize him and basically move him from power, because he didn't funny enough, he didn't play by that same traditional playbook. His thing was, he wanted to build up his country, make Iran a viable state, and keep it moving, and be an economic power. But again, the U.S. once again played by that very same playbook. Destabilize. Better to destabilize and weaken a nation and deal with it on any kind of an equal footing.
So Turkey and Iran have a relationship now because of Saudi Arabia. Both of them, neither one of those countries like Saudi Arabia, politically speaking. And they also have a problem with the Kurds. Iran has a problem with Kurds inside Tehran or the northern part of Iran, and Iraq has a problem with Kurds in what's considered to be Kurdistan of northern Iraq, and Turkey has a problem with Kurds because of Kurdish insurgency inside Turkey. So Israel sees playing the Kurds, supporting the Kurds is splitting the splitting the apple in half, and giving Kurds support. So what they tried to do was give the Kurds international recognition as recognizing the northern region of east of the Euphrates as a state, a legitimate state, by being the first country to recognize it. Only problem with that is that the Syrian constitution doesn't allow for partitioning of the country into multiple states. It doesn't work that way. So they would have to reform the constitution, which is what they've been trying to do the last few months. And they have not been all that successful. So what going forward, I think what's going to happen is that Syria will have to come to grips in what they're going to do with the Kurds. You can't just, at this point, you can't just leave them behind. They're a strong military up there. I think there's about 45,000 Kurdish fighters up there who are well trained, trained by the Americans, trained by the Russians, as well as some external support from what do you call that, European powers. So I believe the French are with them right now, the French and the British. And the Canadians were up there, and the Australians were up there with them. So, as it stands right now, maybe Trump figured out that it's not worth going to war with Turkey over Syria, especially over Kurdish people who don't have their own state. My suggestion has always been, why don't you just give these guys all the weapons they need to defend themselves against Turkey? Because if push comes to shove and they decide to go in there and slaughter all these people, Turkey's not going to leave Syria that easily from the north. They're going to take the north. And if you let the Turks in there for an extended amount of time, you're going to have a hard time getting them out of your country, especially if you're Syria.
Yeah.
Your military has been decimated the last 5 or 6 years. So, and you don't have a whole lot of money if you're Assad. So you ran out of money in 2015, which is why the Russians stepped in.
Yeah. Also, I just want to add though. I mean, if you speaking of Armenian, Mike, you remember what happened? You know how during the Ottoman Empire era, you know how they treat those ethnic minorities, right? Look at how they slaughter millions of Armenian Christians, but yet they continue to these days denying the genocides, that genocide's existence, and America support it. So the fact that America, they have the audacity to challenge America is really indicative of the failed foreign policy, Middle East policy of the United States. You know, that's what I never understand, right? Trump has all these galls, right? All these courage to stand up against so-called, those, our competitor like China or North Korea. But when it comes to all these Middle Eastern countries, he's mute. He's a mute as a cat, right? Have you noticed that? When it comes to Middle Eastern countries, he has no damn galls. Also those. Remember that 7 Muslim ban? Remember that Muslim ban that he banned? Remember that?
Yes.
Look at all those countries that he banned. Not all of them were a Shia Muslim country. So that's what I'm saying. I never understand why the hell America continue to stab his friends in the backs, while uplifting all these enemies, So because the Shia Muslims are the one who actually fighting the ISIS, at the time. Fighting all these radical Islamic extremists, but yet America refused to do that. So to add on to that, you say that why don't America just give weapons, to its Kurds and let them fight Turkey?
Well, to defend themselves, against the Turks.
That's what I'm saying. Because politically speaking, all these short sights of foreign policy strategists, and I don't care if it's the Trump administration or the current administration, they only looking at the short sight game, that personal game. They don't look at the long term repercussion. They think that somehow. Go ahead.
Isn't Turkey a U.S. ally? So
well, yeah,
they were a U.S. ally. They were a U.S. ally.
Oh,
that's what I'm saying. Nominally speaking, they only quote unquote ally so far as because they supposed to fight the Islamists in the Middle East, just like Pakistan, not really supposed to be a United States ally, but yet they continue. Because the Pakistan has the largest cohort of Taliban outside Afghanistan. You guys know that, right? So, but yeah, the United States continue to support Pakistan and all these countries that harbor radical Islamic extremists. They have banned them. They have this apocalyptic vision of creating a second, the clash of civilization between the Western society and so that's why when the United, even though that Turkey is nominally speaking the ally of the United States, but realistically speaking, even I don't care if it's ideologically, economically or militarily. You already gave the example of how Turkey quote unquote accidentally shot. That's not accidental. Nothing's accidental when it comes to friendly fire. Accidentally shot all the U.S. Service members. That speaks of volume of how soft the United States has become when it comes to standing up to these Middle Eastern tyrannical industry, tyrannical regimes. But yeah, somehow he has all these goals to stand up all this quote unquote tyrannical regime in the Far East, like China, North Korea, or Japan, even Japan. So that's one thing I never understand.
Yeah, Trump is looking at this from a business perspective. He's looking at this and saying, why are we spending so much money on this? What's the return on investment? And getting Assad out of power, that's not going to happen. You already had the Sudanese president show up last week. Then you had I want to say it was the Kuwaiti ambassador or something like that show up in Damascus as well, or maybe it was Iraqi. So you have all these countries that are basically giving him phone calls. The Venezuelan president Maduro giving him a phone call, congratulating him, congratulating Assad. Iran basically is the strongest ground force inside Syria, and then Russia controls the no-fly zone. basically keeping other countries from flying in there, flying their planes in there. It's over. But for Trump, he's looking at it from a financial perspective, saying we spent $5 billion inside of a country and got nothing in return, other than destroying the infrastructure. So what's the point in being in there? I might as well pull my guys out now, which is something that they've been wanting to do. They wanted an exit, but they never knew how to really get it, and Trump provided that exit for them. Now, it's supposed to happen over the next 90 days.
So let me ask you this question: what type of blowback is going to come from pulling out of Syria? How do you think it's going to blow back in their faces? Because they invested that $5 billion, right? Got nothing in return. Politically, what's going to be the ramifications of this?
Well, it's going to be second Iraq. Worse, if anything, worse. You remember how when the United States pulled out of second Iraq, all these translators, all these individuals who work for the United States got slaughtered. Remember that? Remember that? How they were literally slaughtered. I'm talking about anybody who were remotely supported the United States at that time during the Iraq War were literally slaughtered. And the whole world saw how traitorous, those American, well, it's America I'm talking about, referring to those the administration. Look at how the United States treats allies, and the fact that the United States pulled out of Syria right now without even any consideration of repercussion, it's just another further solidification. So really, in other words, it's a further deterioration of the United States leadership. How that's one thing I never understand, right? America, all these people want to say that America has all this moral authority, military authority, economic authority, is the beacon of light of the world. But yet, look how it treats its friends and allies. How this betrays, its allies and so forth.
So it's kind of, in other words, you're saying like America's kind of going against their own creed.
Not only that, not only that, is the fact that you got some. Let me just use some urban slangs here. You got some bitchmate individuals in the current right, seriously, they have absolutely no consideration to the ramification of the number one, to the rest of the the perception of the world toward America as a whole, the country as a whole.
Yeah.
All because what? All because they want to shore up their political capital, right? Because really, the whole point of they pulling out is because they think, you know why Trump's pulling out, right? Because number one, he's trying to mimicking what Obama did, when he pulled out from Afghanistan. He think that, okay, well, I'm going to have some kind of legacy. Because, trust me, nobody want to be in the war, which I completely understand. But the fact that when we put out Syria without consideration of his allies on the ground, just like, when we put out Iraq, Afghanistan without consideration of his ally on the ground, it just completely immoral, right? Because the fact that you abandon all these people basically to, you think about it, when you put essentially, a good analogy. You remember how during the Reconstruction when Union troops put out of the South, how all these segregationists and the pro-slavery people all of a sudden that's when you usher in the second Jim Crow era. That's exactly what the same scenario is playing out right now. When you put out all these,
but see, that's why I say that the people within the deep state who are really calling the shots, they know exactly what they're doing. Pull out to weaken and destabilize another state. It's a game plan that has been played out over and over and over again. They don't care about the civil and moral and global
exactly no consideration
ramifications. That's all lip service for the masses, for the media. All they care about, weaken and destabilize that state, because they would rather deal with a weakened and destabilized state than a peer on equal power and level.
They don't have the resources to sustain these sort of clandestine operations. That's just not gonna. It's not gonna work for them.
They who?
United States.
You don't think so, Mike?
They're pulling out, right?
Right, but they're pulling out mainline military.
What I'm saying is this sort of operation from Trump's perspective is not. You don't have the resources. Like you could be better spending it somewhere else.
Oh,
There's no
okay.
return on investment on these operations at all.
Right. True,
If
true.
the idea was to get a Qatari pipeline through Syria, that's not going to happen. If the idea was to overthrow the Assad government, that's clearly not going to happen. They already put, the last time the United States fired, Trump fired cruise missiles into Syria, um, they they took Assad out and put him in some secret location, but they put Chinese and Russian administrators inside the Syrian palace, and basically said, "I dare you to bomb it now." And that didn't happen. So they skipped around it. So it's game over. Basically, it's just like the U.S. officials said. The objective is to create quagmires all around Syria for the Russians. Basically, keep putting banana peels under their feet so they keep slipping. But Putin has already spent enough money. He's already spent his $2 billion on Syria, so he's done. Um, Syrian government ran out of money in 2015. So they ran out of their war chest is empty right now. So they really don't have anything else to gain. They said that they were going to take back every inch of the country, including the Golan Heights. So if they're moving their forces right now. I just saw a news bulletin come up that they're sending all their forces up to the Kurds to protect them. So we'll see how this works out. In terms of Turkey going in. I don't foresee this lasting very long for Turkey if they get into a conflict with all of these forces, because they even have Hezbollah transferring their soldiers from Lebanon into deep pockets of into Syria. So
let me ask you this question, Mr. Paul. So, can you're stating that their end goal is a destabilization of Syria, right? So let's say once it is destabilized, what's the next step? What do you foresee saying happening? What would be logically next for U.S. to do,
What
diplomatically?
what what the next step would be for the U.S. to do whatever and anything that they want with a free hand, because if a country is destabilized and weakened, they can send special forces in to take people out as they so see fit. They can create business deals that are favorable only to U.S. companies. They can do whatever they want with a free hand. If a country is weakened and destabilized, you know, you are basically at the mercy of who's coming to you on an economic and military level, which is exactly what you're seeing with the 54 sovereign nations in Africa. They're destabilized, they're weakened. China is in the driver's seat of every economic and potentially, we're now hearing, military deal on the continent. So when America destabilizes and weakens a nation, they're in the driver's seat. They don't have to deal with them straight up. America can deal with them on terms that are favorable to the U.S. They take the driver's seat in every interaction. That's the end goal.
yeah,
Yeah,
the U.S.
yeah.
doesn't want any sort of political and power and military equity with any country.
Yes, exactly.
So it's more. So overall, this is a power move, like it was a power move pretty much. So this is more of a chess move than checkers. Then you
Yeah.
guys
Oh,
explain it.
correct. It's bro. It is never checkers. It's always chess. I highly recommend, if you're so inclined, research the Project for the New American Century, PNAC, PNAC, the Project for the New American Century.
Hmm.
There was a paper written. It's called, I believe, don't quote me. I believe it's called The Way Forward, and it outlined since actually, believe it or not, excuse me, since 2001, it outlines every country in turn that the United States has sent troops in and destabilized, and everything that has happened. It's outlined and detailed every country like dominoes, including the stands. But so far, only Afghanistan has been the only stand affected. But no, this is literally a 50 to 100 year plan laid out. These guys don't look at 6 to 12 months to 36 months. These guys look at 50 to 100 year plans, and it's laid out step by step by step.
Interesting.
Yeah, the way they see it is right that the cost of human lives, in the process are nothing but collateral damage. So to them, regardless how many people are going to die in all these conflict as a result of destabilization or whatnot, to them it's just all part of the chess move, right? You know how sometimes when you sacrifice pawns, whatever, when you play chess. So same thing. That's how they perceive it. They perceive the loss of human life as it's just incidental casualty. Another thing I want to add is that in terms of why is Syria so important, right? If you look at the map, right, Syria in the location of Syria, right? Why is Syria such important? Why is all these countries converging? Because, for example, to Turkey, Syria is essentially the gateway to the Middle East for Turkey, right? And so same thing. Syria is the gateway for the Gulf states as well as Iran and Iraq and so forth to Europe, right? So basically, that's why they fight all these proxy war in Syria is because the fact that it's a strategic located such that is if you want to exert influence, whether it be westwards or eastwards, that is the battleground. So that's why you see so much conflict and bloodshed in Syria is because the fact that it's almost like a dividing line between the east and the west. Because remember, Turkey is supposed to be the so-called what do they call the Eurasian country, right? Half Asian and half in Europe and so forth. So Syria is the next. So that's why Syria plays such a crucial role in terms of geopolitics. So if Iran ever want to have an influence on the Middle East, they already have Iraq, so because Iraq has majority of Shiites. So, but Iraq is the dividing line between the Shiites, Iranians, to the west, and Sunni Muslim in the Gulf state, such as Saudi Arabia, United Arab, and so forth. But yeah, I mean, look at Yemen though. Yemen's all the way at the end of Saudi Arabia. So that's why you see Iran is supporting, Syria here and Yemen over there. Really, what they're trying to do is basically trying to gain a sphere of influence.
Yeah, don't forget that there's Shiites inside Saudi Arabia as well, outside of Mecca.
Yeah, well, but they pretty much suppress them to the point of they become powerless. At this point. Not only powerless, they pretty much become extinct right now. They're literally killing Shiites right now. That's what they're doing right now.
Yeah, that's true.
They're literally slaughtering Shiites.
And Saudi Arabia has its own problems because even though it's a Sunni nation, they have an internal struggle because the royal family, they're Wahhabists. Okay, so their Wahhabism is another subsect of Sunni Muslims. Okay, sort of like here in New York, we have the Orthodox Jews, but then there are the Lubavitchers, okay, which are a subsect of Orthodox Jews. So it's the same thing with the Wahhabis. So they have their own internal struggles. There's a lot of strife between the clerics who don't like a lot of the things that the royal family and the government are doing. A lot of the citizens don't like a lot of the things that the government is doing because they don't feel that they're following strictly religious line, which is really a whole entire other conversation. Because in this day and age, you can't run a nation based on solely religious aspect. You can say it, but that's.
Oh, I just want to add though, because used to be right. Iraq was the undisputed leader of the Sunni Muslim war, right?
Mm-hmm.
When under Saddam Hussein, that's why he was persecuting all these Shiites, Iraqi, and so forth. Now with the overthrow of Iraq, now Iraq becoming a Shiite under Shiites' influence. So now you left this power vacuum, right, of the Sunni Muslim world. So that's why Turkey and Saudi Arabia has this underlying conflicts, because they are competing for the leadership role in the Sunni Muslim world.
But
So that's why, even though
funny because Saddam Hussein was a CIA asset. I mean, we've all seen that picture of '79 when Donald Rumsfeld was there at the behest of the CIA director George Bush, Daddy Bush, to make overtures to their asset Saddam Hussein. But I'm sorry.
We actually got to get to the next article, so I just want to.
All right.
Scholar Chain, if you can wrap up real quick.
Oh, I'm down. Like I said, we can continue on to the next topic. That's fine.
All right. This one is from the dailybeast.com. Bolton's hawkish Syria plan backfired, pushing Trump to get out. The National Security Advisor expanded U.S. goals in Syria to challenge Iran, but Trump wasn't on board, senior officials say, and Turkey took an opportunity to push the U.S. out. A fateful decision by National Security Advisor John Bolton to expand the United States goals in Syria backfired, and is a key reason why President Donald Trump ordered a total withdrawal of U.S. troops. Two senior administration officials told the Daily Beast. Bolton in September added a second mission to the already open-ended operation in Syria. In addition to destroying the so-called Islamic State, U.S. troops would stay in Syria indefinitely, forcing Iranian forces there to eventually withdraw. Trump adopted a bellicose stance towards Tehran long before he became president, but he was never comfortable with an indefinite stay in Syria yoked to Iran. The officials said that Trump was willing to tolerate fighting ISIS, but was already uncomfortable with the duration of the war for that purpose. In the spring, he told audiences that he was willing to pull out of Syria very soon, something his senior advisors had to expend political capital to reverse. Yet in September, Bolton, known as one of Washington's most hawkish foreign policy hands, especially towards Iran, effectively reshaped the war with a new goal. We are not going to leave as long as Iranian troops are outside of Iranian borders, and that includes Iranian proxies and militias, he told reporters during the United Nations General Assembly. Some leading Pentagon officials were uncomfortable with Bolton's anti-Iran goals in Syria. Days after Bolton's statement, senior Pentagon officials signaled to Congress that they weren't on board. In Syria, our role to defeat ISIS, that's it. Our role is to defeat ISIS, and that's it. Brigadier General Scott Benedict, an officer of Joint Staff, testified at the House Armed Services Committee. Bolton revised policy led to broad and public articulation by the State Department's envoy on Syria, Ambassador Jim Jeffrey. But officials said Jeffrey was implementing what he thought was a policy Trump endorsed. The president, quote, the president wants us in Syria until Iran's withdrawal and the other conditions are met, he said in late September. In Syria, added Brian Hook, the State Department's special representative for Iran, we have three goals. It's to defeat ISIS, it's remove all forces under Iranian control from Syria, and to advance an irreversible political process under the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2231. So basically, Bolton is a little bit of a psychopath. he's willing to sacrifice some some bodies inside Syria, to hit this new objective of keeping Persians out.
I'm trying to figure out, but why? Why would he want that?
Because that's what Israel wants.
Damn.
Well, not you mean why do John you mean why do Bolton wants
Yeah, why does he want that?
You mean as far as why did he want to push his anti-Iran stand? Yeah. Well, partly is because Israel. Another part of the reason is because you're always going to have one of those hawkish foreign advisor in the current administration or in the administration that has certain anti-hatred toward certain countries. Like for example, the Trump trade advisor, forgot his name, who is extremely anti-China. So you got that guy. So the same thing, Bolton plays a similar role, except in this case he's anti-Iran. So you always got he's surrounding himself with different advisors who somehow just have this mitigated hatred towards a specific country. Like for example, you got Bolton anti-Iran. You got the other guy, I forgot whatever the hell his name, I forgot. He wrote that book, Death by China, something like that. Who's anti-China, and then he got another guy who's I forgot his name again, anti-Korea. So that's why that's the type of person that he surrounds himself with. Another thing is the fact that the article mentioned how Turkey threatened to invade Euphrates, where there's 2,000 United States troops stationed there. You know what that means, right? That really is essentially what that means is a provocation of war. So the fact that Turkey is going to threaten to invade a country while the United States already in the process of fighting ISIS and already has troops on the ground in that case is really a provocation to the United States. That's just another further evidence to demonstrate how, like I said, how soft the United States image has become towards certain Middle Eastern countries.
Paul Bryant.
Yeah, I would largely echo what Scholar Chang just said, and I would just further add that every U.S. administration has their hawks. It just seems that some administrations seem to have more hawks than others, but the quote unquote neocons, or whatever name you want to give them, they have been on an absolute warpath for pushing their agenda, pushing their goals, and I just I look at everything that comes out of this administration and the moves with an absolute grain of salt, because I see ulterior motives everywhere. I see absolute ulterior motives, and because on the face of everything that these guys do, nothing makes rational sense. It makes absolutely no rational sense. So I sit back and I scratch my head, and I really try to just sift through all the noise to try to find out where is the real benefit here.
Well, if you're working for somebody else, the United States is a client to the Middle East. They defend Saudi Arabia from potential threats around the region, and they protect Israel. So Israel's foreign policy is to keep Iranians out of Syria. They had actually came to grips that they weren't going to get rid of Assad. So they were okay with that. They were okay with Assad being there, just as long as the state was weak, right? Just as long as his military was weak. They can't actually take the Golan Heights, and they can't respond to an invasion inside Lebanon, because that's really what they're worried about. Israel needs southern Lebanon badly because they need the water, and if they don't get the water, they're gonna they will cease to exist as a country in the next 20 years.
Right.
They're basically thirsty at this point. They're going to die of thirst. They're going to die of thirst. So the idea is to destabilize Syria, destabilize Iran through sanctions, and weaken the whole Palestinian objective to make them basically submit. And make it so that no other Arab country can respond to any sort of aggression towards Lebanon, because that's the key component for Israel to survive is Lebanon.
Yeah, because Israel has, for those listening who don't know, Israel literally has no natural resources. Israel's biggest export are drugs, both legal and illegal. You know,
Technology too.
And technology now. Yes, yeah,
That's
right.
Yeah, that's why Israel is so technologically advanced. It's because the fact that they literally built a country
Yeah,
on the wasteland.
right.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
it's a literal rock. Nothing grows there. It's it's rock. It's just rock and sand and dirt and dust and that wall and but everything that Israel does comes from a standpoint from their viewpoint, not mine, from their viewpoint of self-preservation. So when a nation state feels that they have to take any actions for their self-preservation, hey, the gloves come off. So that's why you see the Mossad doing what it does, because the Mossad is an absolute weapon. Okay, they're a weapon. The CIA has the money, but in terms of developing human intelligence, the CIA has nothing on the Mossad and the KGB. So
because they're organically grown in comparison to the CIA. CIA came out of military intelligence after World War II, so
yes,
they're a little bit different. Whereas Mossad was actually funded by Jews on the ground who were mercantiles for clandestine operations. So it has a different culture.
Right. Totally.
Go ahead, Jack.
No, I'm trying to understand more. So explain Lebanon to me more. Like I didn't know that they're they're fighting for that viable source of water there. So how long has this been going on with Lebanon?
Since
Israel?
the state was established in 1948. That was once they cleared out the Palestinians from Transjordan and the Syrians and the Egyptians. The objective was to go into Lebanon and take it all to themselves, and it actually was very close to doing that in the early '80s, and then Iran stepped in, so they got some support from Iran, and that's how Hezbollah came to power after 1984. So Hezbollah is basically a paramilitary wing that has political power within Lebanon. Because of that, they are deep inside southern Lebanon to keep the Israelis out.
Now, how powerful is their military? Is their forces?
65,000 soldiers, 24-hour response time for their reserves, and a 1 hour response time for their southern region. They are pretty after the Syrian war, because they've been in the Syrian war since the beginning. They are fully trained and well armed. They got 10,000 missiles pointed at Israel, and there's nothing that Israel can do about it.
Damn.
And they have capabilities to actually get their ground soldiers into Syria and actually take over if they need to. In that part of the region for Israel, because Israel doesn't have a real response to a hand-to-hand battle. They would actually lose.
Which is why you have seen, if you're aware or follow, for those who follow, which is why every Israeli prime minister since the 70s basically spends at least some part of his term trying to break that country.
Mm-hmm. And they can't. And they recently have found natural gas and oil outside of Lebanese waters, or within Lebanese waters. And the Russian oil energy company Gazprom is inside Lebanon now. So basically, Putin has told Israel that this is an invasion inside Lebanon is a no-go for you.
So what are they gonna do then?
They're gonna fight for it. They'll fight for it. There's oil or natural gas under Gaza. So there's a necessity to get rid of the Palestinians now and broker a deal, or just completely ethnically cleanse them.
Wait,
Out,
Mike,
out.
what did you just say? There's oil under
There's oil, there's energy underneath Gaza.
I didn't know
Really?
that.
Yeah.
I did not
So
know.
that's
Yeah.
that's probably why when they start pulling back, when they weren't when they start pulling back on them, is that the reason why his I forgot his name, not
Netanyahu.
not him, but his person that was his right hand man that left, that resigned. I forgot his name.
Oh, Lieberman.
Yeah, Lieberman. Is that why he was like resigned because of that? Because
No,
his main objective is to take
no, they
over.
want to. No, they want to get rid of. They want to get rid of Netanyahu. Netanyahu's not even a real. He's not even really Jewish. He's from New York City, anyways.
Is he really?
Yeah, he's from New York City.
I didn't know that.
He has dual citizenship, so he's not really officially a Jew.
He sounds Israeli.
Well, that's because that's his background, right? He has a strong background, but he's not really within the Knesset like that.
Gotcha.
He's not one of those guys. He's a phony, but they want to get rid of him before they get themselves involved in something that they don't want to, because he's doing this for his own political capital, right? He's threatening to invade Lebanon because that sounds really mighty of him, and it gives him political clout. He's clout chasing, but the reality is, if he decides to go into Lebanon, he will be defeated. Israel suffering a defeat like they did in 2006 would be catastrophic for them.
Damn, checkmate.
We as black people can learn so much from what Hezbollah does, how they're organized, from top to bottom. They are a blueprint for how black people should operate in America, and for whatever reason we don't seem to think that that's a possible attainable objective.
I agree totally. I
2%.
couldn't agree more.
Every Lebanese citizen has to donate 2% of their annual income, to the Hezbollah coffers. That's how they stay in power. They have clinics. They set up their own clinics, set up their own hospitals, set up their own transportation services, set up their own daycares, early learning centers, and community outreach. They do a lot of community outreach. So you're required to do community service and things like that. For people's kids, their fathers have died in previous wars and battles. So somebody has to step in and do mentorship and things like that. They are well organized, like something no one's ever seen it like that before. And on top of the fact that they're deep inside Latin America too. So they have satellite places inside Venezuela.
I didn't know that. So, okay, this give me quick. What are technology wise? I know Iran is leading in nanotechnology. What are their technology capabilities? Like, what are they leading in? What's their cornerstone? Like, what is it? The satellites, space.
Who are you talking about?
Lebanon.
Lebanon is a poor state. They don't really have their main bread, income is coming from tourism. It's not really coming from anything else.
Okay.
And even tourism is pretty risky there, right? Because a lot of the infrastructure was actually rebuilt by Hezbollah, funded by Iran. So all the buildings and infrastructure that Israel had bombed, all the water treatment and facilities, that stuff has been rebuilt by Hezbollah. So they basically survive based off of tourism, and I don't think it's a whole lot. I think they only have a very small GDP, but it would be much bigger had had Israel not been not Israel, but had the United Nations not put sanctions on them and things of that nature. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, let me move on to the next article real quick. This one is from TheGuardian.com. Trump attacks Mattis and complains others take total advantage of the United States. Trump takes swipe after pushing Defense Secretary out early. In tweets, President also attacks U.S. diplomat Ben McGurk. Names under consideration to replace Jim Mattis as U.S. Defense Secretary are, quote, not all military, a leading Trump ally said, as the president pushed the retired Marine general out of the White House door, literally. Mattis resigned this week, but Trump brought forward his departure, piqued by a resignation letter which was strongly, if implicitly critical of the president, particularly over his treatment of U.S. allies, and which attracted favorable media coverage. The Deputy Defense Secretary, Patrick Shanahan, will take over as acting secretary. On Monday morning, Trump tweeted that Mattis, quote, did not see as a problem one of the president's bugbears. The cost of alliances with countries with the cost of alliances with countries which supposedly take total advantage of American taxpayers. He also attacked the U.S. envoy to the coalition fighting Islamic State, Brett McGurk, who also resigned. Mattis' removal came amid a government shutdown, and as Washington Post and New York Times published reports on the White House in meltdown. Trump was depicted calling advisors fucking idiots and complaining that so much of Washington and the media is against him. He faces a war every day. Trump now needs a new face to run America's everyday wars. Mattis and McGurk resigned after the president abruptly decided to withdraw 2,000 troops from Syria, seemingly at the behest of Turkey, which is openly hostile to America's Kurdish allies. News of a planned withdrawal of half the 14,000 troops in Afghanistan followed. So I'll stop right there. Scholar Chang, tell me what's going on.
You talk about in respect to Mattis. Well, I think what Mattis did was that he just wanted to how can I say this? He has two objectives, right? One, he wants to distance himself from Trump, just like some of those previous generals are, in terms of his foreign policy, because the fact that Trump's foreign policy does not really follow what's the word I'm looking for? A military, I guess, more militarily sound decision. Like, for example, the fact that they put out all the troops from Syria just because Turkey requested, even though that all his allies, surrounding allies, are against it. So that's why he wants to distance himself from that in Germany. On the other hand, what Mattis wants to achieve was that he want to emerge from. How can I put it this way? He's coming from most military leaders, right? I don't know if you guys noticed that. You notice that the hawkish people tend to be the one that have never really have a very strong, long record of military services. The more hawkish the people is, they tend to be the less the actual people who have a long-standing period of military services, especially general and so forth. Like, for example, one person comes to mind, President Eisenhower, right? They tend to be pragmatists. If anything, they're anti-war and anti-irrational decision-making. So on one hand, even though he might be supporting the pulling out the troops in terms of de-escalating the conflict, but on the other hand, he noticed that the decision that Trump was making, pulling out the troop, was not driven by strategy. It was driven as a result of influence from Turkey, right? While at the same time, again, it goes back to my original theme that America keep on stabbing on his friend in the backs, but while uplifting his enemy. We might see that even though Trump on one hand say, "Oh, we need to stop," American taxpayers need to stop bailing out all these quote unquote friends or whatever. But yeah, look at what happened right now. America continue to bail out Turkey, continue to send support to Turkey, and Turkey is not even an ally. I mean, even though I'm not talking about not nominally speaking. I'm talking about substantively speaking. Yeah, nominally speaking, Turkey is an ally, but substantively, it's not really an ally to the United States. Just tells you that the inconsistency and the irrationality of the foreign policy decision. I'm all about de-escalating war. I'm all about pulling out troops. But the fact that you pulling out troops not because of not as a result of deliberate attempt, but as a result of external influence, it's dangerous. So what's next? What do you think? What's next? Turkey is going to ask the United States to pull out all its troops from the Middle East, that seems what the article suggests that eventually that's what Trump's trying to do. Mm-hmm. Why? Just because Turkey somehow, I don't know what's going on between Turkey and Trump. I say,
they put sanctions on Turkish officials. Remember that earlier this year. So they collapsed the lira, which is the Turkish currency. So that sent their country into a tizzy, financially speaking. So, but that's where the conflict is. But originally, the conflict came from the United States supporting a military coup operation in their country.
Oh, which one? With Turkey, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, of course. If we're going to go trace back, we're going to trace all the way back to Iran in 1950 and so forth, and the same thing with Iraq and so forth. But in the case of Turkey, it's more unique because the fact that the United States bowing down to not the United States. I'm sorry, I keep saying United States. Trump, the current administration, is bowing down to the wish of Turkey. Is, I won't say completely irrational, but it's pretty irrational because the fact that Turkey is also is also a destabilizing influence in the Middle East. Why? You saw the article how he's trying to invade. They're literally trying to invade the Syria while United States were fighting ISIS. We don't talk about after fighting after war with ISIS was over. It was during the process of fighting ISIS. Right? Think about this. You're supposed to be an ally of the United States, but yeah, you're gonna attack the United States while the United States was fighting the enemy. What does that make? What does that make Turkey? Right? So that's why Mattis wants to distance himself from that, because the fact that but again, by the same time, he's just probably doing that just because he wants to appeal to the some individual, like I said, the deep state, the mainstream media, because like I said, Trump's foreign policy at this point is pretty much a laughing stock, in the mainstream media. So he just don't want that dirt to be rub off onto him. So maybe that's why he just want to wash his hands clean. Maybe that's the reason.
Yeah, and keep in mind that the United States took their nuclear weapons out of Turkey this year in August. So they spent all of August taking out all their nuclear arsenal away from Turkey. So they pulled out all their bases as well. So all their bases have been closed. The last bases I think that are there, Germany took out their stuff back in 2016. 2016 they left. So just before the coup, I think they took their stuff out in March. I think the coup was in July of 2016. So what you're seeing is people are NATO allies are abandoning Turkey as we speak, and the discussions with the Russians to actually put a military base, a Russian military base outside of Ankara.
Well,
go ahead, Paul Bryant.
Nothing that Trump is doing, as Scholar Trang said, makes any military sense at all. It's like, I almost hate to even use this reference, but it brings me back to 1940 to 44 and Hitler. You're not listening to your generals. You're making emotional choices. But I have to say that I think it's a combination of whether it's Trump or ultimately, the deep state, which is really calling the shots. They're not making choices that are wise militarily. Okay, because yes, you may have your blueprint for how you want to destabilize this nation and things that you want to do, whether it be in Syria and Turkey, but militarily, you're really putting America in a bad position. And for Trump, to fire Mattis, you know, think think about the image that sends to the troops. You have a government shutdown. They're not getting paid right now. So American military every day, they're literally working for free, putting their lives on the line for free. And then you fired an ex-general who's the Secretary of Defense. Think about what that does for unit morale. Think about how that affects the troops. And then also think about the image of instability that sends to other nations around the world. And then you wonder why nations no longer fear America because, you know, as we said just last week with the whole Brexit thing, the stability of a nation comes from the perception of the very top. So now at the very top, you see this clown making these absurd moves. So nations are thinking that America is unstable right now and very weak militarily. So the ramifications are more wide ranging than I think people are even realizing right now.
That's what I'm saying. Used to be, right, when Trump was first came to power, right? One of the laudatory feature, that a lot of people, especially his supporters, were praising him about was the fact that he surrounded himself with all these military general, all these decorated, well decorated generals and uh, ex service member and so forth, veteran and so forth. The fact that now he's treating all these, now he's forcing one after another out of cabinets. It's going to take a toll on his taking toll on his image, right. And that's why, like I say, by again to add on to what what Paul said earlier, they add on to the weakness of the United States because our wars see that if you have all these military, all these generals with all these vast wealth of knowledge about geopolitics in terms of military strategy and so forth. And when their advice are being ignored and disregarded, that's why all these wars say, okay, well, then we no longer need to fear the United States because we know that the decision or the United States are made is not going to be based on the most I can say the judicious one, right? It's not going to be the most judicious one. It's going to be a bunch of emotionally driven decision. So that's why, like I say, that further just contribute to the weakening of the United States.
Right. I mean, exactly. You look at the image of Brazil. Why does Brazil look weak? Because of political instability. They had a coup. Why does England look so weak? You had 4 prime ministers in the space of 9 years. The last 2 who were both done over this Brexit thing. Why does Greece look so weak? Instability behind the financial crisis, and the same thing is going on now in France. Instability. So now you have the United States, instability within the government, cabinet ministers left and right quitting, being fired. And now you have the Secretary of Defense. This is what? So now Trump is on his 3rd Secretary of Defense in his 1st term? It's absolutely absurd. So I laugh. To me personally, it's comical because it's so sad that you have to laugh to keep from crying at the absolute absurdity and hilarity of the entire dog and pony show.
Jack Charles.
Well, my thoughts on it is again, we gotta look at Trump. Trump is not he's not seasoned, right, as a leader. Businessman, he's well seasoned, very successful, right? But as a leader of the country, he's not, of the free world, he's not good at that. And that's obviously shown. So I personally think this is the fault of the American people, man. They're looking to make America great again, but as each day goes on, we're not looking great in the other countries' eyes. Maybe in our own eyes, we think we're looking great, but what somebody calls a fugazi, but I don't think it's fairly accurate that his presidency, like he's really doing a great job, right? So what administration has there been where someone like a president has been moving like this? Is there any other administration that has so many change of cabinet members? Because I can't think of any.
Never.
Well, keep in mind that Trump wasn't supposed to be in this position. He didn't even have a victory team when he won the election because they didn't anticipate him actually winning the campaign, right? So they didn't have a post follow up to who they were going to choose for their cabinet and things like that. They thought that Hillary's going to win and that was just going to be the end of it. And then when the results turned out that he did win, they didn't have a strategy and they were scrambling. And now everybody um, who was an opportunist at the time jumped on the bandwagon, and those who jumped on the bandwagon got easily smacked down by the deep state. He has a very ragtag cabinet because he wasn't supposed to be in the position that he's in right now. I mean, the closest military experience he probably has is probably being at the Salvation Army, ringing the bell or something like that. But he's he's no foreign policy guy. I mean, he's politically ignorant and illiterate. At top of that, so I as much as some people dislike him, I don't fault him for being in the position that he's in. I mean, he's been basically tossed into this. Wasn't really groomed for this. So,
Okay.
and the article is basically saying that he could actually pick somebody who's non-military. So it sounds to me like he could pick a deep state person, um, for this role.
Which should concern, if not frighten, at the very least concern every person, because that is an absolute, well, there already is an absolute deep state takeover, but now it's like they're coming out into the open. They're coming out of the shadows. That's like this idea that which I believe started with John Panetta, that the director of the CIA doesn't have to be military.
Right.
That's insane, absolutely insane.
Let me hit this last article and then we'll open up for open mic. All right, this one is from NPR.org. Quote: "We will curse them as traitors. Syrian Kurds react to U.S. troop withdrawal plan." The green landscape of rural northeastern Syria is home to wild ducks and donkeys and villagers tending cattle. And U.S. military bases housing 2,200 troops. American soldiers patrol the countryside in armored vehicles and hover ahead in Black Hawk helicopters. In the Kurdish majority area known as Rojava, towns are bursting with Christmas decorations. Holiday lights Holiday lights adorn almost every main street in the city of Komishi, whose diverse population includes many Christians, and shops are selling tinsel and plastic trees. But President Trump's sudden decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria has overshadowed most of this year's celebrations. Syrians who have made the U.S. troops feel welcome here say they are shocked and upset by the news. Some are calling it a stab in the back. This is the part of Syria where U.S. troops have backed up local fighters enforcing ISIS out of nearly all of the nearby cities and towns they once held. The Syrians, led by Kurdish fighters, have lost thousands in the fight, and some feel their sacrifices aren't being acknowledged or repaid. Um, Paul Bryant, what's your take on this?
Again, more of the same. I think it's the deep state ultimately calling the shots that are militarily unsound. At least you can have whatever your opinions are about the military, but at least they make decisions that are based on sound military tactics and strategies. They may not always be the best as far as public opinion or what's right and what's moral, but at least it's about defense, fight the enemy. You know, Things like this make no sense. But again, it does make sense from the standpoint of weaken and destabilize a region. So if they can't remove the leadership of Syria, destabilize the region by pulling out all the troops. So that's pretty much the way I see it.
Skull Chain.
So that again, to echo, we talk about the previous article that I just read, right? Yeah, the fact, like I said again, the fact that you have all these Kurdish fighters who have really grown to rely on the United States support, and all of a sudden that support is being shut off abruptly, without any warning and so forth. It's like I said, it's going to expose all of them to the residual elements, because remember, Syria still have all these radical Islamic elements that beyond just ISIS. ISIS really is just a small fraction of what the underlying radical is. All the so-called moderate, a lot of the so-called moderate, a lot of them are also pseudo radical too. They could turn this radical they can become radicalized in any minute. So that's why Kurds have hoped that by supporting these efforts, against ISIS, they will be able to achieve some sort of autonomous, because that's what the whole Kurds really fight for. They fight for, how they fight. They were just kind of like the Jews, back in before in the founding of Israel. Is they really just be able to find a land that would be able to settle down and then build their own, whether it be country or region and so forth. But now United States not only failed to deliver that promise, but now also exposed them to slaughter. And on top of that, all these Christians, who fought alongside with Kurds and so forth, also saw how all those bullcrap about how Trump said he's going to supporting the Christians and persecuted Christians and so forth. So that nothing but a slogan. It's going to take a toll on not just on the current administration's image, but taking a toll on the image of the United States as a whole. That the United States is continued to be another one of those unreliable, untrustworthy allies that just not fit to be a global leader. So that's why.
Jack Charles.
No, I'm just still thinking on Scholar Chan's point. That sums it all right there, man. Yeah, I have nothing to add to that.
Yeah. So Syrian Kurds are a bit of a pickle, because you sided, legally speaking, under constitution of law in Syria. They sided with the foreign adversary, which is the United States.
Yep.
So now that the United States is pulled out, you're looking for the Syrian government to protect you from.
But you know what? What's set up? What's so fucked up though? Assad, right? Assad. All these people criticize him being those tyrants and desperate, whatever. He's actually very tolerant when it comes to coexisting multi religions. So that's why when Kurds fighting ISIS, all this ISIS element came from, right? Came from those so-called, like I said, moderate, quote unquote, previously, formerly so-called moderate, Free Syrian Army or wherever they are, right? They become radicalized. They become ISIS. So Kurds was actually fighting alongside the Syrian army to some extent. The fact that the United States was supporting Kurds in a sense that it's also supporting Syrian government, but on the exterior, the United States was supporting publicly supporting those Free Syrian Army, so-called Free Syrian armies, which are a lot of time, majority of them are radical Islam in the making. They could turn, like I said, in just a matter of time. So that's why it really makes your brain really, really wonder what the hell's going on here, right? What the hell is going on? There's no coherent strategy. There's no coherent strategy like what Kennedy once said, right? We'll support any friend, oppose any foe. It's not like that. It's all about what makes my political capital boost up at this moment. It's almost like It's almost like his tweets. It's almost like his tweets. That his tweets going to shift from one to another without any consistent, without any logical transition. It's one from another, and that's very dangerous, because that's how all these major conflict came from. Is when one leader made the wrong decision.
Oh yeah, yeah. And going back to the Kurds, I mean, they also sided with Israel, right? So they went to Israel looking for support for this sort of Kurdish state inside Syria, which is against the constitution itself. So you've been siding with the adversaries of the Syrian government, and now that these adversaries are no longer supporting you, you're coming back to Damascus and saying, "Please help us," because the Turkish military is on, a convoy is on its way, and they plan on, burying us. Now, how far Turkey is going to go, I don't know. They've been bombing Iraq the last few weeks, and the Iraqi government hasn't really said anything about it. So I think Iran is pretty satisfied with putting the squeeze on the Kurds because they've had to deal with Kurdish fighters in the north of their country too. So they were backed by the United States, and now that a lot of their fighting power, the Kurdish fighting power is coming over from Iraq into Syria to take on Turkey. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, the potential right now is that Blackwater could take over where U.S. military left the power vacuum inside Syria.
Bingo.
Yeah, I just saw an article on that. Yeah. So.
Bingo.
Well, that's been discussed the last few years, right? So that's been the whole entire. Is the U.S. going to bog themselves down in Syria or not, or in Iraq and Afghanistan? I don't know. Betsy DeVos is the sister to Eric Prince. Eric Prince could potentially be, could potentially replace Mattis. It could Trump's looking to make a business move if he thinks he can save 25% on foreign policy and military expenditures by hiring Blackwater. You could potentially see that, and you could potentially see Blackwater deepen themselves inside Africa. If Trump stays in power past 2020, because he may see that as a potential bid for contracts, and that keeps the U.S. out of Africa and allows AFRICOM to call the shots, but puts Blackwater on the ground.
Well, we all know Blackwater's controversial past, man. They're like,
well, it's Africa. There are no rules.
Oh my God! All right, so what are the Kurds' option right now? What are their options?
Surrender. Put your guns down and surrender.
They are in a box right now. They're absolutely boxed in, and really quick, to speak to something that Scholar Chang just said about what JFK said. Hey, listen, JFK was the last U.S. president not controlled by the deep state. And what did they do to him? They put a bullet in his brain, literally.
Yeah, I would blame Israel for that too. So
really,
yeah, Kennedy was anti-Zionist, and
I didn't know that.
Israel was working on their nuclear weapons in the late 50s, early 60s, and at that time, the United States had not fully sided with Israel, so Israel needed just nuclear technology, so they ran to France, and it was Charles de Gaulle, that actually helped facilitate these nuclear technologies into Israel. And Kennedy was spying on Israel, and that's how you got the USS Liberty attack inside the inside the Mediterranean, basically, and they tried to sink it, and it was Lyndon Baines Johnson who basically ordered that attack to sink it.
It's like parts of history that just like this disappeared, man.
They were going to bomb Egypt with a nuclear bomb at the time.
Mm,
They had already took off from the aircraft carrier, and they called it back.
wow.
So they were going to bomb Africa. So
Wow. I had no clue about that.
Yep. Because you know what? For some reason, people seem to forget Egypt is in Africa. You know.
Yeah.
yes, it's the strongest military in Africa. So
Yeah.
right now it is. Right now it's the strongest military, but back then it was a very controversial piece because it straddled the Middle East, and Israel wanted all that territory to themselves, and they weren't going to get it because the Russians were backing them, and the Russians were going to bomb Israel. Uh, they were going to bomb their Haifa industrial center because that's where the nuclear development was taking place. So
Yes.
That's
there's a whole
crazy.
lot that there's a whole backstory that goes behind that, but that's how it pretty much went. Israel at the time, I think it was Ben Gurion did not like the idea of Kennedy poking his nose into that, so um, off with his head.
Right. I mean, you know, it's a common it's a common trope to say that Kennedy was killed. You know, the lone gunman theory, and that
Oh, no, well,
there's another common trope to say that it was over the the refusal to go back into Cuba to remove Castro. I would say yes, those were factors. There were many factors, but if you look at Alan Dulles and his brother J. Foster Dulles and their interests in Israel and other places, and Kennedy's refusal to play ball with the deep state,
Hmm.
they put a bullet in his brain.
Bob,
He was the last president not controlled by the deep state.
but you know what the irony is?
Last Catholic president as well.
Oh
Yeah,
yes, he was.
but
Well, first and only Catholic president.
yeah,
I'm sorry, Scholar Trent.
yeah. I was about to say, but you know what the irony is?
Yes.
His brother Robert Kennedy
Hmm.
was actually killed by Palestinian nationalists.
Oh, you mean
So
Sirhan?
yeah, because the fact that he was supporting the existence of Israel. See, that's what I'm saying. I'm kind of ambivalent toward this. On one hand, Israel is the only democratic country in the Middle East. Middle East, literally the only.
Allegedly Democratic.
Allegedly. Right.
No,
Allegedly.
actually, they actually live even more democratic than the United States. I think they have was I think they have those parliamentary. They use the parliamentary system as opposed to.
Right.
They can't have a full democracy because they will be outvoted by the Arabs, which are the Palestinians, and that's what they're worried about. That's
Why?
why you can't have
Yeah,
a single. That's why you can't have a single state. You can't have any state that
yeah,
legitimizes
yeah, yeah.
Arabs and Jews because the Jews would be outnumbered, and that's why they have to recruit.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. But by the same token, though, politically speaking, right, it's also surrounded by all these so horrifying, like it's a very present. I'm pretty sure you guys read on the daily newspaper how group of Christian here got killed, a group of Shiites here got killed, a group of women that were attacked, and then there were so forth, so forth. So the point is that no matter how we think of Israel, at the same time, it's literally alleged, like I say, at least on the surface, is the only liberal democracy that we have in the Middle East.
You know
But
what?
at the same time, I just don't like the fact that Israel continued to do all this power play, pitting pitting the having United States to sometimes support its own enemy at the expense, like I said, at the expenses of the United States, while also stabbing friends in the back. Like for example, when Israel decided to so remember when Syrian civil war was raging on between the Assad and the Free Syrian Army and so forth. Israel actually crossing the border. They were dispatching medics, I think, across the border to help heal those Free Syrian Army soldiers, which many of them eventually become radical Islamists and become the forerunners of ISIS and so forth. So that's
Well,
why I'm very ambivalent over Israel.
Yeah, well, but you know, Israel really, if you really look closely at the Knesset and how the Knesset operates, more so as far as how it's structured, how it operates, it really, in a lot of ways, is like America. It's a republic. It's not a real democracy. Yes, they
Yeah,
have
yeah.
elections and everything else, but they are a republic. Political power is based on wealth and military power. It is a classic Roman based um re
Gentry, very
republic.
gentry.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at for obvious reasons, some would say obvious reasons, almost every prime minister since Ben Gurion, they've come from the military or from the Mossad. Almost everyone.
yeah, Ben
And
Gurion. I think Ben Gurion was the only one that did not come from. He
yes,
was he and Ariel Sharon. They were too young to be. They were more political figures than the original political figures, right? They're part of that the founding fathers.
but Sharon was in the military, unless I'm mistaken.
No,
Unless I'm
Sharon was
mistaken.
in the military, but what I'm saying is when he came in, he was more of a political figure.
Okay, okay. Yeah,
But
because
yeah,
they
even Reagan didn't like him either. Didn't like the
Sharon.
Zionists.
Yeah.
No, didn't like the Zionists in Israel. So that's why they tried to get his ass killed before.
Oh.
Same thing with Daddy Bush. Bush didn't like him either, and they told Bush that you would be a one-term president. And so sure enough, he became a one-term president. That's when Clinton came into office.
Hold on. So Mike, what are you saying that John Hinckley didn't act alone?
They were Israel was a very unique party. I mean, Reagan didn't understand why they were in Lebanon and why they had to take orders from Israel. They didn't understand that. So,
Well, you know what's funny though, to me, if you look at it, I see people love to compare Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler, but I like to compare Donald Trump to Ronald Reagan because
yes.
he was a political novice. Yes, he was the governor of California, I believe one term. Don't quote me, but he was a political novice. He was not the sharpest knife in the drawer. He was of advanced age, and he seemingly uh, openly pushed the agenda of the deep state. And he was the one who used the $6,000 hammers and the $1,000 seats, toilet seats, to hide the black budget, which went along with the military spending ramp up. I mean, it was an exponential increase in the military spending, and the U.S. activities in North Africa and in the Arab speaking countries. So I really see a huge correlation between Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump. And Reagan also uh, brought in a sweeping wave of economic reforms that helped Wall Street but hurt Main Street.
Well,
Jay, you got the last word, so before we close out.
yeah. I agree that the closest contemporary one would be Reagan. Now, if you want to trace even more further back, he reminds me of that president's right after
Truman.
No, Truman's a liberal. This right. When I say liberal, I don't mean the contemporary liberal sense. I mean the classical liberal, the real liberal, the one that actually actually pro working class, as opposed to all these limousine liberal. Trump is more of a blend between Calvin Coolidge and actually no, Calvin Coolidge is a little too actually no, not Calvin Coolidge, Hardin, yep, Hardin.
And Wilson?
Yeah, and Wilson's a little too interventionist. Trump is not really interventionist like that. Hardin and what's the
Teddy?
word? No, he's not as Teddy has actually have a military record, so has a
He was
military.
a hawk. He was a definite
He was
hawk.
a hawk, but his background himself dictates. You know, he actually served. He actually fought in the Cuban-U.S. war, unlike Trump, where Trump never fought in any war. So, yeah. The closest he has was flying a couple planes in the freaking Air Force, and not Air Force Academy, that wherever that Air Force Academy was he was able to exempt from the Vietnam War services.
Right.
Teddy actually served. Not Teddy. I was gonna say Hardin. Yeah, Hardin would be the closest. I would say between a blend between Hardin and Reagan, because they're both, like I say, they're both celebrity presidents. Like, for example, Reagan, right? He has you know what the previous position of Reagan was, right? He was an actor in Hollywood, so he was the celebrity at the time. And so same thing that now Trump was a really celebrity president because he has his own shows. He wrote all these books and stuff. So he's a celebrity president. The danger of celebrity president is that it could be double-edged swords, right? On one hand, they can push for gender real quick, for if the genders are really actually beneficial to America, or they can push for some bunch of anti-American gender also. So that's why I kind of wish that we have a president that's similar to LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson, that actually a lot more pragmatic and a lot more legislative. Not legislative, a lot more how can I say this? Because he a lot more how can I say that? Pragmatics. Yeah, a lot more pragmatics.
But he was the first. He was the first president controlled by the deep state.
Yes, he was actually the son of a Zionist. His mother was a Zionist.
Oh, Trump?
LBJ.
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 He was very racist as well. He's pretty blatant with his racism.
Yeah, and he was the one who gave us the Great Society.
Yeah. You should have read his tape. How he described it. And Martin Luther King. When he was angry. But the point is that at the end of the day, like I say, but at the end of the day, to be honest though, if I have to choose again, if we go travel back in time, to choose the election again between him and Hillary, unfortunately, he's still going to be the better choice than Hillary, because Hillary is just, if Hillary right now, if Hillary were the president right now, if you go on the train as a man, if you spread your legs, that's going to automatic felony.
So,
right.
What about Bernie?
No, I'm dead serious. You think Bernie's even worse? Not only going to get felony, you're gonna get felony. You're gonna have all your houses repossessed in the name of social justice.
That's not
no, seriously. Yeah. Who is I don't think you guys know. He you guys probably know about her whole history, right? A silence of dissent and having people disappear on who she disagreed with. You remember the whole story behind that's why that whole white water scandal, remember? When all these when all those attorneys commit suicide allegedly. She's behind all of that, and she's also behind the whole illegitimate biracial child of Bill Clinton. Remember that when Bill Clinton fucked that Arkansas girl, black girl.
I don't know if you're I don't know if you're aware, but there is a trope out there that says Hillary was part of the DNC cabal that had Ron Brown's plane crashed.
Yeah,
when he was the head of the Democratic National Committee. So Hillary she's a piece of work.
Yeah. So basically, at the end of the day, it boils down to they both from the deep state, but somehow one of them is being portrayed as being anti-deep state, and the other one somehow is being portrayed as representing emblematic of deep state. even though they're both deep state. How do you know if somebody's from deep state?
How do you know?
Yeah,
you don't know. You don't know if anybody's deep state. Deep state people, by definition, deep state people by definition are unelected officials who make
exactly
elected decisions. So Trump has nothing to do with the deep state. If anything, he's anti deep state.
You think so? You think he's anti-deep state?
He's too politically ignorant to actually be in that position. And you can tell by the way he talks. He talks. He speaks from the cuff.
Well, that's part of strategy. You know, that's part of strategy. You know how they say, right? You remember the whole classical power is that what's the best way to hide is in the plain sight. The fact that he's been feigning all this ignorant is really a source as a form of distraction.
Exactly.
Yeah, you never know. Like I said, who knows? There's no way. Like I said, deep state. How do you know deep state's really functional? Is that when everyone, their policy, when everyone motives is anti-masses, is elitists, right?
Right, but you always have to maintain a certain amount of balance, because if you tip too far, then the entire state becomes a giant house of cards that collapses. So the deep state have been at this for a very long time. Okay, it was Eisenhower who first made mention of it, and he gave it a name, the military-industrial complex. But they've been around a lot longer. If you go back to Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, J.P. Morgan, John Jacob Astor, or those individuals, they've been around a lot for a very long time. But LBJ was their first president that they control. So they've been at this for a long time. So they kind of tend to know how far they can go before it reaches the tipping point. My caveat with what I just said is, I think that right now they're pushing the envelope, and I think we're all gonna feel the heat from them pushing the envelope on this one. They pushed the envelope before, but I don't see that they've pushed the envelope quite this far.
Well, at the end of the day, we are just pawns. Like I said, we are nothing but pawns in the whole global scheme of things. To me, we are just sacrificial, necessary sacrificial lambs in the process. So that's why they. So anytime when all these, I don't care if it's Trump's camp or Hillary camp, all these so-called progressive, conservative, whatever. Whenever they argue about so-called, American people, whatever, what they really represent when they talk about the American people, they talk about their group of American people.
Well, we'll close it out by saying, like Confucius say, not to be bitch made. All right, thank you all. Thank you all for joining us. We'll be back on Friday with episode 116, Economics. Later.